And call the Senate to order. Sergeant Arms will please secure the chamber doors. Members, please take your seats. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. President.
All right, Senators, it is great to see everyone here. We're back on the floor after this quite intense snow event here on Thursday, January 29th. We are joined today by Reverend Scott Shelton of Heritage Baptist Church in Annapolis, Maryland, guest of the distinguished senator from the capital city. Please rise for the invocation.
Just for a few moments, would you join me in collective silence and reflection before I offer just a few words? The responsibilities of this day have fallen on the people in this chamber. Help them to understand their power with humble resolve and egoless ambition. I'm wondering today about all the people in their lives, past and present, who look on them with glowing praise that got them to this spot on this day. The days when they doubted or thought too little of themselves, but only to hear an encouragement from these gloating relatives and friends to keep going, that people need you, don't give up. May each person in this room live into the words spoken over them from the people that know them best. Today and all days, may what is right and just also be what is politically advantageous. But when it is not, give each person in this room the wisdom and determination to do what is right and just for all the people of Maryland anyways. Give them the humility to listen, the curiosity to learn, the patience to navigate definitively, the persistence to keep pushing, and the insight to know deeply. This is my prayer with everyone here. And so may we continue this prayer in our words, in our hopes, in our actions, and even in our laws. Amen.
Thank you, sir. That was wonderful. Thanks. Appreciate it. Recognize the senator from the 30th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we thank Dr. Shelton for the beautiful prayer this morning. As you said, he is the pastor of First Baptist Church, which is here in Annapolis, Maryland. Dr. Shelton's church is constantly reaching out to the community here in Annapolis. They operate a food pantry that operates weekly in Annapolis and serves many Annapolitans. He also has many services that operate out of his church. Local nonprofits are able to use the beautiful facility there to serve the community here in Annapolis. He truly is a blessing to our community. I ask that his words be journalized.
Without objection, thank you for that, Senator, and we will certainly journalize the Reverend's excellent invocation this morning and hope to live up, or aspire to live up to the objective today. So thank you very much. Thank you. All right, has everyone recorded their presence today? If so, the clerk will take the call. With 43 members in the chamber and a quorum being present, the Senate of Maryland is now back in session. Let's do introductions. Any introductions to kick us off today? Yes, recognize Senator from Montgomery County.
Thank you, Mr. President. I need to start by celebrating the birthday of my fantastic Chief of Staff, Abril Hunter, who's with us on the floor today, along with her sweetheart. Alex is shadowing me today, and he's just a super smart, effective consultant in D.C., and I'm looking forward to spending the day celebrating both of them.
Excellent.
Please welcome them to the Senate floor.
Welcome and happy birthday. Happy birthday. Very good. Yes, co-chair of the Protocol Committee, or Senator from the Middle Eastern Shore.
Thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. It's my honor to introduce to you a lifelong friend of mine who has joined our office on a part-time basis. We had a staffer become ill, and she's a native of the Bay 100 in Talbot County, and we grew up, went to school together, but she's up there in the front row. That's Deanie Blaze. Deanie, thank you for being here.
Excellent. Welcome, Dean. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your pinch hitting, and know you'll do exceptional work. Any other announcements? Any other announcements? Yes, Senator from Baltimore City, 40.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm not sure if the folks from Center for Urban Families are here in the balcony.
Just
oh,
arrived.
there they are, yes. So I know their bus was running late today. But Mr. President, colleagues, in the 40th Legislative District of Baltimore City, we have one of the most phenomenal workforce organizations in the state of Maryland. They work with individuals throughout the city to really empower them to make the choices to join the workforce and to be active participants. Myself and the senator from East Baltimore was most recently honored by this organization, as they do a lot of great work in their state, and they're joined by their leaders, including, I believe, Joe is up there. Colleagues, please join me in welcoming to the Maryland State Senate the Center for Urban Families on their Advocacy Day here in Annapolis.
Excellent. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Appreciate all the work that you all do. They do phenomenal, phenomenal work. I've had a number of constituents and others and friends and others that have had some great guidance. They just do excellent, excellent work. Yes, Senator from 37th.
And would now be a time to introduce our pages for the week?
Yes, please. We did it yesterday with the pro forma, but we think they deserve the full Senate welcome. So yes, please.
That's right. It's been a hard week for the pages. They haven't had a chance to
That's
see
right.
us all together. So, colleagues, let's make some noise and support for our pages. Our first page hails from District 5, Liberty High School. Anika Agarwal. Thank you, Anika. Our next page hails from District 34, Loyola Blakefield High School. Andrew Blackburn. Andrew. Our next page hails from District 23, Dr. Henry Wise Jr. High School. Kadeem Brown. All right, Kadeem. Our next page hails from District 29, Leonardtown High School. Margaret Bile. Our next page hails from District 14, Damascus High School, Ryan Chidakel. Our next page hails from District 41, Digital Harbor High School, Jerome Graham. Jerome? Our next page hails from District 4, Walkersville High School, Thomas Kelly. And our last page for this week hails from District 22. That's Northwestern High School, Alula. Oh, wait a minute. Alalua Oni. Alalua, thank you.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you, pages, and hopefully you've seen some good work in committees. You'll see some interesting work on the floor today, and we'll be busy the next go-round. But I had a chance to stop and have a quick conversation with them. It's always nice to get the excitement of the pages. They have hope for government, and it's a good reminder of what we can all try to bring every day. So, all right, let's see. Are there any other announcements before we jump into the work? If not, so be considered the reading of the journal from the prior legislative day. We do still have some bills to introduce. We're over 400 now, so we're currently at, let's see, after this calendar, we'll be at 421. So we're in a decent spot, a little bit less than we've had in prior years, which is not a problem. Certainly committees are starting to feel backed up, but we'll have the deadline is coming up shortly. Last Friday was the request deadline, but it does seem like there are about 300 or 400 bills out there right now in offices. So if you're going to do it, sooner you get it in, great. If you're not, just let us know so we can not even anticipate it. All right, clerk will read the bills.
Senate Bill 404, Senator M. Washington, Motor Vehicle Administration, Access to Digital Records, Baltimore City Department of Housing and Community Development, Judicial Proceedings.
Majority of the move, so be considered the reading of the bills. They'll be ordered to their standing committees. We have some bond initiatives. This is calendar 8. Clerk will read the bond initiatives.
Number 1, Senator Simon Eyre, Chesapeake High School Fieldhouse, Budget and Taxation. Number 2, Senator Smith, Emma's Torch, The Kitchen We Build, Budget and Taxation. Number 3, Senator Smith.
Majority Leader moves, so be considered the reading of the bond initiatives. They will be referred to the Capital Budget Subcommittee. Let's see, we've got a report from the Committee on Finance. This is report number 1. Clerk will read the bill.
Senate Bill 17, Senator Hayes, Baltimore City Alcoholic Beverages Related Event Promoters Permit, favorable.
Recognizing the floor leader, Senate Bill 17.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 17 is an emergency bill that authorizes that the Baltimore City Liquor Board of License Commissioners issue a related event promoters permit for the Central Intercollegiate Athletic Association. We refer to it as CIAA. It's a great basketball game. It's the oldest African-American basketball tournament in the NCAA. It's brought over $109 million to Baltimore and Maryland. And now that we've been awarded an extension in that contract, we're extending the promoter's permit that we created a couple of years ago and to the full extent of when this tournament will actually be here in Baltimore in the state of Maryland. There are no amendments, there's no fiscal impact, and there was, more importantly, no opposition at the committee hearing. I move that we adopt a favorable committee report.
All right, the floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 17 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Let's go to the report on committee, the Judicial Proceedings Committee. This is report number 1. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 1, Senator Augustine, Public Safety Law Enforcement Officers Prohibition on Face Coverings, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the chair of the committee is the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And what I'm about to say applies to both of the bills on the calendar. As I move through my community and throughout the state and talk to people from across our state, it's obviously a very disorienting time in our politics, and from a wide range of issues, but in particular through immigration enforcement. And I think of just the pace of events in the last couple of weeks, Mr. President, from Renee Good to Alex Pretty to a 5-year-old, Liam, being separated from his family now in a detention center, from the Baltimore City Detention Center and the human rights violations that continue to go on, from masked agents dragging people from their cars and from their homes without a judicial warrant, from families being separated and from communities being fractured. What is happening is not sustainable. And the 2 bills on the calendar are aimed at addressing that. And Mr. President, I want to thank you for your leadership in ensuring that we address these issues head on and early in session. Senate Bill 1, as amended, requires that the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission adopt a policy applicable to all 24 jurisdictions with regard to wearing masks. It also applies to federal, state, local law enforcement. It applies to all law enforcement agents that come into our state from other jurisdictions. Violation of this would be a $1,500 civil citation, and a violation of this policy would be would be subject to police discipline. So with that, Mr. President, I ask for the favorable committee report, or adoption of the favorable committee report.
The 2 amendments, Senator. Do we have amendments?
My apologies. The First Amendment is sorry, there are 2 amendments. The First Amendment is technical, and the Second Amendment provides that the adoption of the uniform policy preempts the adoption of other policies regarding face coverings by counties, municipalities, and law enforcement officers, agencies, and then makes it a civil offense and provides for the form of the issuance and adjudication for the citation of the bill. Mr. President, I move for the adoption of the favorable committee report and 2 amendments.
All right, floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. We'll start with the amendments. Discussion on the amendments. Any objections to the committee amendments? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Recognize the senator from Frederick County.
Thank you, Mr. President. If the floor leader could
Will
yield
floor
for a
leader
few
yield?
questions.
Senator may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. So on this bill, we're talking about adopting a policy, or that there's no policy crafted in this piece of legislation right now. Is that correct?
That's correct. The bill calls for the Maryland Police Training Standards Commission to adopt those policies that would be applicable statewide.
Okay, thank you. And does the MPTC, Maryland Correction Police
MPTSC.
Training Commission, do they, who do they craft policy for?
Law enforcement entities throughout the state of Maryland.
Currently, in their job description or in their responsibility, is there any legislation, is there any policy that written under MPTC that is enforceable on federal law enforcement?
The policies that are enforceable apply directly to the state agencies at the current time.
So there's none. That is no. There's no policies in the state by MPTC. And I want to be clear. So MPTC is charged with the responsibility of ensuring that the standards are uniformly implemented, applied, and trained on for all law enforcement in the state. Each standard under the Maryland Police Corrections and Training Commission, when an officer in the state of Maryland goes through a police academy, they are charged with having a knowledge of those rules and being accountable for those rules. They have to pass tests. So again, we're back to federal agents who are not Maryland law enforcement. They're federal agents. They're trained as federal agents. Now we're having a policy crafted in which they won't be trained on. Is that a fair statement?
They would not be trained on this particular one, but as with every law that we pass, it's applicable to everyone who is present in the jurisdiction.
Well, every law we pass for that we leave a policy. This isn't us putting a policy together. This is a policy that's being crafted by someone else. We're giving them the authority to make this policy that's going to be then enforceable upon federal agents
That's correct.
with no training.
No Maryland-specific training on that. That's correct.
Okay. Thank you for that. And so I guess my next question is, normally when there's a violation under the Maryland Police Accountability Act that this body passed, when you violate one of the standards, it's enforceable under the MPAA. Is that correct?
And that's correct, and the bill makes that clear.
So would a federal agent be subject to the same Maryland Police Accountability Board, the Administrative Charging Committee? Would they be subject to those investigations?
No, just the civil citation.
The civil citation. Okay. So can you explain to me functionally how this plays out? We have a federal agent who's enforcing federal law in the state of Maryland. They have a face covering on. We have a local law enforcement officer who sees this agent wearing a face covering and is directed to issue a citation. And for those of you that aren't aware, when you have to issue a citation, whether it be civil or criminal, you have to ask for an ID. You ask for an ID, you write the information down. There's a temporary detention that occurs during that. Is that not correct?
So you've explained that process. You've answered your own question in that process. But one thing you did, the senator did not talk about was the discretion of the officer. The officer has discretion to evaluate the situation and then decide whether to enforce that citation.
Well, that's a wonderful point, and I'm glad you brought that up, Senator, because discretion is actually the policy that the federal government uses right now for their agents on whether or not to wear a face covering, is it not?
Currently, ICE does not have a policy on face covering.
So that would be officer discretion.
That's correct.
Okay. So back to the discretion point, though. So here's the scenario I'm giving you. Federal agent in Maryland, masked, enforcing federal law. We have them inside of a local jurisdiction with a mayor who sees said subject wearing a mask. That mayor has the authority to direct that officer. Now, we've taken away what you're saying is discretion because he's being directed to enforce this civil policy. How does that functionally play out?
Senator, what you've built is a hypothetical on top of a hypothetical on top of a hypothetical. So listen, I mean, yes, the mayor could conceivably direct an officer to do that. You've answered your own question by playing out how that would actually work functionally.
Just a reminder
So-
before we just
Senator, yes,
to avoid
Senator, yes.
avoid the use of direct pronouns of the senator, and if we could keep it in the third person to
Oh, okay.
enlighten the debate. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. President. So, Senator, I'll separate them out. If a citizen sees a local law enforcement, the MPAA allows that any citizen, any complaint from the public in general that files a complaint against a law enforcement officer must be investigated fully to include a full internal affairs investigation. It has to be turned over, regardless of the disposition of the internal affairs investigation, to the Administrative Charging Committee to determine if there was a violation of policy. And they have to go through this extensive process when any officer has a complaint lodged against them by a member of the community. Is that correct?
Senator, yes, that's correct on the back end if a complaint is filed. But in terms of the reality of how things play out on the ground, of whether someone would actually file a complaint, I think about if an officer is doing speed monitoring and sees 4 or 5 cars racing down and chooses only to pull over one, would then a citizen say, well, I saw 3 other cars get away, I'm going to file a complaint?
Well,
So that's where the discretion comes in, Senator.
In the scenario you gave, you're saying 4 or 5 cars. They can only stop one car. They've got one vehicle. So first of all, and secondly, it's very subjective because unless they're actually engaging them with a speed measuring device that gives an exact determination, it would be a very subjective determination on how fast they were going. What I'm talking about is something that's clearly definitive and identifiable as a violation that this bill would make. By simply having the face cover on, it's no longer subjective.
Senator, the point of the example was to outline the discretion that is available to the officer that is applied throughout the state on countless occasions throughout the day. And complaints are not filed under those scenarios. It's just not a practical thing that actually happens.
That's where we're going to disagree, because being that I've overseen internal affairs and seen the investigations that come in and the complaints, I will tell you that when someone sees an officer and they feel that their failure to act, if the officer looks at another agent in a mask and a citizen in the community feels that that officer's responsibility was to go and enforce this civil charge during the course of their federally sworn oath and responsibility, that person can make a complaint on that officer, and it has to be investigated, and it will be found that they failed to act because they observed it. If they observe it, you are now putting them in a position to be disciplined by a complaint by someone that is a third-party observer that saw this. So I'm just laying that out because I appreciate your saying that this is discretionary. If it's discretionary, then why are we don't have this problem going on that we're seeing across the country, thankfully in Maryland. What we have is, we have this piece of legislation coming forward that is now going to put local law enforcement, it's going to pin them against federal agents. In that, to enforce this bill, would the local officer be required to approach and ask the officer for identification?
Senator, the purpose of the law, which our committee has done work over the years to repair a once fractured relationship between law enforcement and the communities they serve. Masks undermine that trust and that transparency, and that's why we're here talking about this piece of legislation. But with the disciplinary process, that office, if it goes down that path, which is highly likely in my estimation, the officer has the affirmative defense of their discretion. They didn't feel that, after evaluating that situation, they didn't feel that it was prudent or lawful or to go forward with enforcing that particular action under those circumstances. So that is the defense that officer has in those administrative proceedings.
Thank you for that, and I will tell you that defense does not hold water because it is not an objective standard. It is
the reasonable officer standard.
Correct, because the officers are required, any complaint that is lodged against another officer is investigated, and if it's determined that they failed to act, they can be held for dereliction of duty to that degree. So this is the problem. This is one of the many issues with this. The other is that I'm glad you brought up about trying to restore that trust through the MPAA, because I've been a part of that, and I've been a part of this legacy of trying to, create that transparency and the trust within the community to find the comfort with law enforcement. And when we're talking about face coverings, the problem is, you can't see who they are. I'm still asking about the functionality of the bill, which you haven't answered fully, Senator. However, when we're talking about this, one of the points I brought up was I wish that this body would have taken an action to partner through a commission, some type of bipartisan teamwork, and have an established framework that we would go with as a commission, as a team, and present, look, in Maryland, we require all our law enforcement officers to have a badge identifiable with which agency they are, an ID number that they has to be clearly identifiable at the time of any community interaction, and you have to have a plate on the back which identifies the agency that you're currently employed by. This is a very tangible way that we go to restore that. I don't like agents jumping out of cars in civilian clothes and throwing a vest carrier on. I'm not a fan of that with no plates, nothing, no identification, because I think in that scenario that there could be a reasonable concern by members of the community, like, well, what if just Joe Citizen does it and I don't know who they are and they're trying to, one of the ways to mitigate that is to find, the reason it's called a uniform is because it's one thing that's standardized that everybody would wear. So when we have this opportunity to partner and hear the concerns of this body and our citizens, What we're not doing is, by the masking thing, we're creating an issue between law enforcement where there could be a jurisdictional, because we haven't even gotten to the supremacy clause yet, but instead, we looked at doing this matter of virtue signaling, in my opinion, instead of looking at something that could have real tangible results, that would have meaningful results, that every officer in the performance of their duty, federal agent in Maryland, would have identifiable markers on them that if a citizen had a concern about how they conducted themselves, there was an appropriate identifier on their being for recourse. The face should not be the determining factor of any of that. So, having said that, I do want to bring you back again, Senator, and thank you for indulging me. How does this functionally play out with a local law enforcement officer who has been no longer given discretion, but a mayor has ordered him to enforce this law that we're passing? How does this play out functionally in our state?
Senator, just to address a couple of things you mentioned. One is that I wish that level of cooperation were possible, and I try not to get into the national politics here in Annapolis, but it's just impossible under these circumstances. The way that the administration is weaponizing this agency, it's just not sustainable, tenable, constitutional. But
did we try
to posit that level of cooperation would be even possible?
Did we try, though, Senator?
Is I think just an illogical assumption, but. Senator, you've answered the question as to how it would play out if a mayor were to direct an officer. We went through the scenario. You answered that question in your
But
in your
I'm
call.
asking you in this setting where no one else was at the hearing, how does this play out? Do you want me to go through the whole thing and see if you can disagree with it? I'm happy to.
Just reminder, senators, please keep, in persons will have the debate in the third person would be excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. No, Senator, as you walked us through earlier, I mean, that officer is going to engage and seek to enforce. They would ask for an identification to issue a civil citation.
During the performance of their law enforcement responsibility.
Potentially.
Okay.
And then that officer would then give him the other officer the citation, and you go from there.
So that's how the chairman sees this playing out. How this plays out is you'll have a local officer going to a federal agent in the performance of their sworn oath and duty and law enforcement function that they are sworn to uphold. That officer is going to approach him and ask for his ID. The federal agent's going to be like, you're inserting yourself into a federal law enforcement action. Get away from me. Then that officer has nothing else to say but, well, no, we have a civil law here. You can't wear this mask, so I've got to have your name. And then the federal agent can go, well, now you're obstructing and hindering my investigation on federal jurisdiction, so you're under arrest. And then the other officers will be like, well, you're obstructing my investigation, so you're under arrest. Could that happen?
I think it's a complex hypo that has not happened in jurisdictions in which this bill has passed. And so it's just, it's a hypothetical, but just in practical application, it hasn't happened, and I don't think that's...
How do we know it hasn't happened? And furthermore, where is anything that I said in that hypothetical not factually, potentially there? By what I said, did I make up anything that could not happen?
Well, as in most hypotheticals, the things could potentially happen, but in practical application, which is what the root of the question was, it has not happened in the jurisdiction that has passed this piece of legislation. And so, hypothetically, a lot of things are possible. Practically speaking, Senator, it has not happened in the
I'm going to simplify it then, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. After this bill passes, would a local law enforcement officer have the opportunity to go and detain legally a federal agent in the performance of their duties?
Again, Senator, they would issue a civil citation, and where it goes from there is a multitude of different scenarios.
To issue a civil citation, is there a temporary detention that occurs to issue that paperwork?
Yes, Senator, and
thank you.
But just qualifying that is constitutional under the Fourth Amendment for those. So we've done some, obviously there's several cases.
Well, that's where we're getting
on point for the state of Maryland that a temporary detention for the purposes of issuing a civil citation, like for instance to enforce a curfew, or to what we do for cannabis, and Senator, how we enforce that, those are constitutional and have been litigated here in Maryland. Those types of detention are constitutional.
So what you're saying is the ones that have been litigated here for those civil citations, if someone ignores that order, what was the next actions of the officer?
Then the option would be you could place them under arrest.
To place them under arrest. That was what I was getting at. And then if a federal agent in the performance of their law enforcement function and responsibility has someone inserting themselves into their official law enforcement function, does that not also rise to a criminal offense under the federal law that someone could be charged?
Senator, if there was an interference, it was determined to be interference with a federal law enforcement operation, then of course that's an arrest.
Great. So this whole long discussion, this colloquy, as my good friend will say, leads me to the actual next step, the most important step, which is the supremacy clause. Do we have an Attorney General's opinion on how this will affect or what standing this has with the supremacy clause of the federal government versus state government?
I did not. I'm aware of one Attorney General opinion that reached an inconclusive. There was no clear conclusion as to the constitutionality of the applicability of this.
I think what they said was that it wasn't clearly unconstitutional.
Which is an unclear conclusion. Yes. And the reason why is because
they don't want to say that the
I would not
supremacy clause supersedes any civil issuance of a citation.
Senator, I wouldn't impugn the kind of like the fidelity of the Attorney General's assessment there. But what I will say is that in California, which is where this bill has passed earlier, that is under litigation. So the answer is unknown. I would look to a case out of Idaho, the Ruby Ridge case, where an officer actually was taken to court by the state, and they were able to jump over the hurdle of that supremacy clause or the supremacy clause immunity. They were.
Explain that, because that was a Graham v. Connor case.
Just a reminder, Senator, please, question will be asked, question will be answered. If we could.
We don't know the answer to that, Senator. We don't know the answer to that case because the prosecution refused to prosecute for other reasons. But to get that case into court, they had to pierce the veil of the supremacy clause immunity, which means that it is not an absolute immunity and that there are circumstances in which states can hold federal law enforcement officers accountable.
But the Ruby Ridge case that you're talking about with the sniper and the shooting falls back to Graham v. Connor, which is a 20/20 hindsight on the actions of a law enforcement officer at the time and the circumstances given. That wasn't necessarily a supremacy clause. That was actually a qualified immunity clause.
Senator, actually, qualified immunity is more civil, not criminal, but it's still, the assessment was to get that case into court, the supremacy clause immunity actually that hurdle was jumped over. I mean, we got into court on that. They just didn't prosecute the case, so we don't know the answer to the question.
So I don't see the similarity in that. You said supremacy clause immunity. It's not a supremacy clause immunity. It's a supremacy clause that overrides in any state civil violation. The federal government is going to have standing, not the local government.
There are two things. So there is something called Senator. There is something called supremacy clause immunity, born out of the supremacy clause, but that's what is generally applied to federal law enforcement officers when they're conducting their business. So there is something called supremacy clause immunity, Senator.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Is there any other? Is wearing a mask a crime in any other state for law enforcement? Is it a crime?
In California.
Is it a civil issue or is it a criminal act?
They had criminal penalties in their bill.
Okay, so they have criminal penalties. We don't have criminal penalties in our bill, right?
We have a civil citation, no criminal penalties. That's right,
okay.
Senator.
Unless the federal agent then refuses to identify himself, which then rises to what level of an offense?
Well, that's a secondary offense, but that's not a secondary offense. That's a secondary consequence of the action, but it's a misdemeanor.
Which means it would be an arrestable offense.
That's correct. Yes, Senator.
So we're going to have officers arresting each other on who has legal standing on a federal law enforcement action.
Senator, if that law enforcement officer is violating the law just like any other citizen, they will be held accountable.
But a part of the law is knowing that you're violating the law with intent, is it not? Intent is a huge part of criminal law.
We generally don't create crimes without an element of intent.
But this one's not a crime. This is a civil issue.
We're talking about the secondary piece, which is the
Which
failure
the-
to cooperate and to produce the ID, not the actual civil citation.
Okay. I would say that a federal agent in performance of duties across this country wearing a mask to prevent themselves from being doxxed or their families from being harassed and doxxed would be something that is being utilized at their discretion because there's no policy prohibiting it in the federal government. Is that correct?
ICE does not have a masking policy. That's correct, Senator.
Okay. Bear your indulgence, please. Okay. What other civil penalties do we have in the state of Maryland that rise to a $1,500 fine?
You know, it's a good one, but there are plenty. Let me ask counsel to rattle off maybe a couple that.
I can give you a really good one. So someone in a park smoking marijuana around your grandkids or your kids, if they get, that's a civil issuance. It's $50 for the first offense, $150 for second or subsequent offenses. So you can smoke marijuana around young children, the horrible stench that it is, and have a contact high by your little 3-year-old, depending on how much they're consuming in that good, lively, fiber of life leaf that has to burn and give them that high, and it's $50. But an officer, in the performance of their duty, federally obligated duty that has been done by every bipartisan presidential leadership of this country, we in the state of Maryland have decided that an officer in the federal agencies coming into the state of Maryland to enforce federal law, we are going to enforce a civil law on you for $1,500 if you cover your face.
Senator, well, thank you for that good
It was
description
good.
of that.
It's good.
Yeah.
Good bud.
Appreciate that, Senator.
Yes, sir.
But I think what you're missing is the context. So the bill allows for several exceptions, defines what is a mask and what's not. But the context in which the bill would be applicable, I think does actually rise to that level of offense because it would be happening in the operation, it would be used to cover yourself for a reason that's not excusable. So if you're conducting an operation, you're dragging someone out of a car, you're pursuing someone down the street, you are just doing your daily street enforcement and you're wearing that mask, absent the exceptions that are created by the MPTSC or that are outlined in the bill, that does rise to the level because that amounts to terror. I mean, that's striking terror into the person that you're interacting with. In all of those scenarios that that the senator talked about, meaning that impersonations can happen, you don't know who you're dealing with. That's terrifying. And so under those scenarios, certainly a $1,500 fine meets the mail on that level of offense.
And thank you for that answer, Senator. And just kind of going back, because you made a really, a good point about earlier, you were expressing that there was no cooperative work happening between our legislative body and the federal government that they weren't going to take any of our advice. And again, I just need to say, has this body reached out? Did we establish anything after our hearing? Did we sit down as a body and say, you know what, we at least should try this first to ask for their consideration to get rid of the fear that's happening and ask for this standardized, uniform application of donning their protective vest? Have we had that conversation with our federal partners?
Answer directly, I have not had the direct conversation with them, but I will tell you my conversations, Senator, over the last year and a half with those federal law enforcement officials, ICE agents, have veered from we're going to target the worst of the worst, and then we're going to get the rest later, and then things just spiraled out of control, and I could not trust the information that I got from that agency. It has changed so quickly. Things have vacillated, and I have zero trust in the way that agency is operating under these conditions.
So Maryland, by your answer, Senator, then you have zero trust. So instead of trying to do this, because quite honestly, I have zero trust that we're going to be left open to officer discretion and that officers aren't going to be penalized in this state for utilizing their discretion to not enforce this, to create a police officer on law enforcement officer issue, we could literally have a scrum in the streets over authority. And again, going back to the supremacy clause and the enforcement legal responsibility and actions of their duty override and supersede any civil citation in the state of Maryland. Can we agree on that?
Senator, unfortunately, no. I just rely on the example of where this bill was passed. It just that scenario, those scenarios they have not played out, and we have not seen that.
So your answer, Senator, is that the federal government in the legal performance of their duty, their sworn oath to enforce federal law that has been done by every presidential administration since 1996, that our civil law will supersede their federal responsibility sworn oath. Is that what I'm hearing you say, Senator?
I say, according to the Attorney General's opinion and according to what's happening in California, it's litigated. It's under
But the
litigation.
Attorney General's opinion was, we don't know. Not clearly constitutional. We got like haze on our glasses. We can't really determine if it's constitutional. Might be, might
Senator,
not be.
I know the answer is not to your satisfaction, but the answer is that it's just simply not clear yet.
So what I will say, and I appreciate your time, Senator. Thank you for answering my questions. I want to just point out to this body, I want to remind this body, it's one thing to exercise good faith in doing things, but when you lack good faith in connecting with your federal partners to find a solution, and you try to ram and force a civil violation on law enforcement officers at the federal level who are in the performance of their sworn oath and legal responsibility, I would say this body is no longer acting in good faith, because we haven't tried to find a solution that is meaningful, tangible, that the community can feel safer in, other than, oh my gosh, let's just charge these federal law enforcement officers in the performance of their duty with a civil violation in violation of the supremacy clause. And I will close out by saying, law enforcement officer for 30 years, and even I know that the supremacy clause is going to void this. And I'm not an AG attorney. So when it comes back that way, just remember this day. I wish we would have had a better discussion and tried to partner with our federal partners, because we have a federal relations committee, albeit we probably don't meet that often, but we have one and we're not using it. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, thank you, Senator. Recognize the minority leader on the amended report.
Thank you, Mr. President. If the floor leader could yield
Floor
again
leader
for
yield.
questions, please.
Appears so. Senator may proceed.
Well, first, thank you both very much. This is certainly educational on what we just heard in that dialogue, but I want to see if I can maybe break it down a little bit, maybe lower than that level of conversation, and simply go and say that, first of all, I've never watched more JPR hearings and voting sessions than I have in the last few days, and they're very animated, as we've seen just now. But part of my question is, as I was looking at the testimony that's online as well, too, I see an awful lot of favorable, supporters for this legislation. Honestly, I don't recognize 95% of who those organizations are. So my question is, was there anybody that represents law enforcement officers that was in favor of this legislation?
I'm not aware that that's in the bill file.
Okay, I didn't see that either. But,
I'm sorry. That's right. That's correct. Former law enforcement Neil Franklin came and testified on behalf of the bill and was on the sponsor panel.
Former law enforcement agency, and he represents a national organization, is that right?
That's right, Senator. And I mean, several decades of law enforcement experience.
Okay, but no longer a law enforcement officer, correct?
That's correct.
And he's not representing other law enforcement officers. He's more or less speaking on his own behalf.
On behalf of his agency or his organization. But
That organization. But again, that's a national organization that seeks these types of legislation in different states and goes and supports them.
I'm not sure that's the I'm not sure that's a fair characterization of the organization, but it is a private organization that he's affiliated with, former law enforcement officer, several decades of experience.
Okay.
But the answer to your question is no.
Okay, thank you. A very important organization, though, did come in and oppose the legislation, right? This is the Maryland Chiefs of Police Association and the Maryland Sheriff's Association. And those are the elected and appointed leaders of law enforcement within our own communities that came out, and they were in opposition of this legislation, right?
I think so. To be candid, their opposition was to the bill before it was amended.
Okay.
We amended it significantly to curtail the criminal penalties and to allow for MPTSC to develop these statewide standards. But the direct points I'll double check to see if their opposition remained after the amended bill came out of committee.
The amendment did not lead, though, to their support of this legislation, right?
Not that I'm aware of.
Not that you're aware of. Okay. The important part, I think, and again, these are the people that are, like I said, elected and appointed to protect our communities. These are the ones that we trust in our community to protect us. And I want to make sure there's been a lot of conversation about ICE, but this bill, does it apply to all law enforcement agencies? Any law enforcement agency in the state of Maryland cannot wear a mask. Is that right?
That is correct, but the Maryland Police Training Standards Commission, comprised of law enforcement experts, are going to develop those standards and exceptions. The bill also lays out what constitutes a mask and other exceptions as well. So the answer is yes, but there are a lot of exceptions.
Okay, but again, those aren't amendments. Those were in place already, or you went from a model policy being decided upon to this entity that was going to decide the policy? Is that what's changed with the amendment that makes that different?
It just gives the MPTSC the ability to promulgate that policy, to develop that policy, and it does not lay that policy out in the statute or in the bill. It gives them the responsibility to do that.
Okay. There was a lot of testimony that was in committee that was saying that these face coverings were simply not necessary. But the testimony, again, from the Maryland Chiefs of Police and Sheriff's Association says that they are critical for safety, operational integrity, and public health. That's their words.
Under certain circumstances, Senator, yes, that's correct. And I think that's why having the MPTSC go through those scenarios. So if someone needs an N95 mask, if they're wearing a gas mask, for instance, during an operation, all of those exceptions are built in, and all of those scenarios will be reviewed by experts in the field to develop the policies that are appropriate for our state, local, and federal law enforcement agencies.
Okay. Obviously, this bill's on the fast track. How long did those policies take to be created? Is it a weekend or a couple months, or what is it?
It could be months or longer, but they meet regularly, but it could be months.
Okay, so nothing takes effect until those policies are created, right? Regardless of the effective date of the bill, until those policies are created.
Correct. That's correct.
There's nothing, right?
That's correct.
Okay. One of the concerns, and I know my colleague talked about it, were what the violations. If a law enforcement officer were, again, deemed to be inappropriately wearing a mask, they talked about the violations. Their testimony says a misdemeanor punishable, but this has been changed to a felony, right? No, still a misdemeanor?
No, actually, neither. It's a civil citation.
Civil
Senator.
citation. Okay. Is it still? I think one of the concerns were that it would be classified as police misconduct. Is that still?
So that would be they're still going to be subject to the administrative process that we laid forward during police reform. So that's correct.
And what could happen to a law enforcement officer that's been sworn to protect our communities if it goes to that stage, and they're evaluated in that process?
Just like any other violation under that administrative procedure, it could result in a number of things, from suspension to decertification.
Termination?
To decertification.
Okay, is that the same as termination?
You can't become a law enforcement, but that's obviously that's the extreme.
But they lose their job as a result of this.
You could be decertified as a law enforcement officer.
And
not highly unlikely that wearing a mask, first time infraction, that type of thing is going to result in that. But you go through that process.
Okay. If you were to go through that process and you were to find, I guess the appropriate where a law enforcement agent were to lose his job, her job, would that require, does that affect a pension that somebody may have earned for years and years and years?
Senator, no, I know bills have been before the committee and before the assembly to do that, but we've never passed that legislation.
Okay, so that wouldn't take this. Obviously, there's a lot of concern about the number of law enforcement officers that we have in our communities in the state right now. Is this bill more like more or less likely to encourage somebody to become a law enforcement officer? Any opinion on that? Was there any testimony on that?
No, I mean, I couldn't opine on that. I would just say that if just thinking objectively, understanding that experts are going to develop these policies and that there are going to be exceptions for public safety, for your own safety, for your own health, and considering all the other dangers for wearing masks, for having masked people who are armed and unidentifiable running through the streets of our city and our state, I think on balance, law enforcement would say that these are actually prudent and sound measures for public safety and public trust.
But what you just said as far as wearing masks in the community, this bill only applies to law enforcement officers, right? This doesn't apply to everyday citizens as far as, you know, wearing a ski mask and walking into a retail store or something like that?
No, it does not. And like I said, it's when you're, that's correct, yes.
So
it does
that
not-
could be
it's-
concerning and terrorizing to the clerk behind the cash register when that happens, right? And we haven't done anything to affect or
We don't have
regulate
open
that.
carry laws here, Senator, so that scenario, like someone walking into a grocery store masked with an exposed firearm, not likely to happen here. And if it did, it would be a criminal offense.
If they had the firearm, but not just the mask. But this is just wearing the mask is becoming a criminal.
That's correct.
A civil offense. You spoke about the amendment that was added, and I think we had some conversation in our caucus about it, that essentially brings us into the judicial system almost immediately, right? The first time that this happens, explain what that amendment does, and again, how much further along this pushes the actual implementation of this bill.
Well, in California is our best example because they preceded us. Not that I know the
My
feeling.
question, California, good example for anything.
What happened there? That there was something called a pre-enforcement lawsuit. So before the California legislature passed it, the governor signed it, and then a lawsuit ensued right away. So you never understand how it played out. But the answer is yes. It would most certainly be removed to federal court in a pretty speedy fashion.
So for those supporters of this bill that think that we're out here and passing laws that's going to immediately change something, when does this go into effect? I mean, what's the real timing? By the time policy is written, by the time something happens, by the time this ends up in a judicial system, by the time you guys talked about supremacy clauses and things like that, when do we see something happen here?
So, look, I mean, the bill has an effective date of October 1st, so that would be the effective date. There is a presumption of constitutionality when we pass legislation here, but it's whenever the litigation ends. And that's the answer, is whenever litigation ends and there's a final disposition on the matter.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Floor Leader. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Minority Leader. Are there any further discussion on that? Yes, recognize the Senator from Baltimore County and Carroll Counties on the amended report.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Floor Leader, I got a
The
couple
floor
of
leader
questions.
yield. Senator may proceed.
Thank you very much. You just said when the litigation ends. So you do anticipate that when this law goes into effect, there will be litigation.
I'd say that's a safe assumption. Yes, Senator.
Okay. Let me start by saying I think you also just mentioned that the bill doesn't take effect until October 1st. This is January. So this bill isn't so important that we want to pass it as an emergency bill. In your view, it's quite okay to pass a bill which is going to allow ICE officers to continue to operate in Maryland with masks until at least October 1st.
So obviously there would be a debate between the two chambers on the effective date on that one, but so I think that discussion's forthcoming and there might be amendments.
Okay. Now, you will recall during the bill hearings in committee, there is a provision in the bill as introduced which stated the law enforcement agency with law enforcement officers operating in the state, i.e. ICE, shall adopt a policy consistent with Maryland's policy on masking. And there were a number of questions of the proponents of the bill as to whether that language passed muster under the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution.
That's correct.
And when the amended version of the bill came before us for a voting session on Tuesday, that language had been deleted from the bill.
That is correct.
So language which was constitutionally suspect was taken out of the bill.
Correct.
Would you agree that the language that remains in the bill requiring ICE officers to obey Maryland's policy on anti-masking is itself constitutionally challengeable?
I think that, like anything, it's challengeable, but I think that's the likely prospect of what's going to happen, yes.
Okay. And in that regard, I think you're aware of the case of McCullough versus Maryland of 1819, the opinion was written by Chief Justice John Marshall, who is regarded as the great Chief Justice, in which he said, the states have no power to retard, impede, burden, or in any manner control the operations of the constitutional laws enacted by Congress to carry out into execution the powers vested in the general government. You're familiar with that opinion and that language from that opinion, are you not?
Intimately familiar, yes, Senator.
And you're also, interestingly, the McCullough case involved the state of Maryland.
Another Maryland case, Senator, is that there?
And so we have another Maryland case dating from 1920. Interestingly, this was not decided by Chief Justice John Marshall. It was in fact decided and written by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. And I think it's important to read out just a small portion of this case and have you comment on it. It said the plaintiff in the case was an employee of the Post Office Department of the United States. That person was arrested in Maryland and was tried, convicted, and fined for so driving without having obtained a license from the state. And then, interestingly, these days the Supreme Court opinions tend to be many, many pages long. This opinion was 5 paragraphs, commendably concise. The final paragraph reads as follows. It seems to us that the immunity of the instruments of the United States from state control in the performance of their duties extends to a requirement that they desist from performance until they satisfy a state officer upon examination that they're competent for a necessary part of them and pay a fee for a permission to go on. Such a requirement does not merely touch the government services remotely. By a general rule of conduct, it lays hold of them in their specific attempt to obey orders. So I think you've read that decision. Do you not agree that both of these decisions, McCullough versus Maryland and Johnson versus Maryland, specifically implicate the constitutionality of the bill that's before us right now?
I think your characterization is fair, and those 2 cases are foundational. But that's why I point to California, which is currently pending, and then the Ruby Ridge case, because the Ruby Ridge case is actually important because it does say that there are exceptions to the Supremacy Clause and to Supremacy Clause immunity when an officer is acting in the course of their federal responsibility. And so the answer is that I don't have an answer for you because it hasn't been fully litigated. And
sure.
So I leave that for you.
But it surely, if we pass this bill, it surely is going to be litigated.
I think that's a safe assumption, yes, Senator.
And when such litigation occurs, the Attorney General of Maryland will be representing the state in those court litigation matters, correct?
That's correct.
So it inevitably is going to involve the Attorney General litigating this matter in court.
That's correct. I see where you're going, yes.
Okay, thank you. When the time comes for amendments, I will have an amendment to offer bearing on this colloquy that we've just had. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. All right, any further discussion on the amended report? Yes, recognize the Senator from Southern Maryland on the amended report.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. If I could just ask a
Question
quick
for the
question,
floor
leader.
Senator may proceed.
I wanted to just clarify a few points, just to make sure. I know we have some extreme weather today, and I was in a police boat for a lot of years, and it says under extreme weather conditions, so we would wear full masks or helmets, things like that. If we were in Western Maryland riding a 4-wheeler or a snowmobile, we would absolutely wear those. Is there an exception in there for that?
Yes.
And that says under extreme weather.
Inclement weather is the term, the phrase.
Okay, so that Chesapeake Bay right now is down about 40 degrees. And I can guarantee you, if you were to go out there for 8 hours a day, come the first day of May, you're going to want that same face covering on. Right? And
That's
so
correct.
you're going to be out there for 8 hours, you're going to be going along, and you're going to pull that cover off. But if somebody went by you in a boat, they're going to see it on there, because that's like standing in front of an open refrigerator or a freezer for 8 hours a day. And we're talking May, right? You're still wearing your long johns out there, because you know if you're out there for any period of time. That's clearly not inclement weather. How is that going to be addressed for the safety of those officers?
There's also an exception for health and safety, and that is the legislative intent. And if it wasn't clear, I think it's pretty clear that that would fall under that. But now it's part of the legislative record that it's intended to incorporate health and safety, and that would fall under that scenario would fall under that exception.
Okay, because I just was going to say, in the exceptions under the face coverings, that clearly is only under inclement weather. It doesn't apply. And I would like to make sure that is the issue. And as a lot of people in here know, I was in charge of a deep cover unit for years, whether they be state officers or most of the time they were TFOs, which was task force officers. When they would go to training at their local office, no matter what police department they were with, sometimes it was imperative that we had borrowed them from other agencies. We had young officers that came in. We didn't want anybody to know who they were. So they wore face coverings even when they walked into the police station, when they were in their training. The officers that worked with them didn't even know have an idea of what their face looked like. Is there a protection in this to protect those undercover officers?
There is yes, there is an exception for folks that are undercover performing their duties. It's in that's actually in the bill.
And when we talk about performing their duties, does that mean any time that they happen to be working around other officers? Because that was the requirement that we had, right, to protect them and their family.
There's not a requirement necessarily that has to be with other officers. It's just in the performance of their duties. So if someone acting undercover.
So anytime that somebody was in a special assignment situation that they might be in plain clothes undercover, they can wear a face mask. Under this legislation, it would be no violation that they would
That's correct.
Be committing.
Yes, Senator.
Okay. And I had, we talk about, on this floor, we've talked about primary stops. We've talked about secondary stops. We've talked about traffic violations. We've talked about criminal violations. We've talked about civil violations, right? And it's very important when we have Maryland Police Training Commission, we know how to escalate when we teach police officers and what their next step is. If it's a criminal violation, a serious violation, and somebody refuses to the police officer, it steps up the ladder very quickly, right? Because somebody could go to jail, they could face, incarceration for the criminal activity. If I read this correctly, this is just a civil infraction with absolutely no possibility of any incarceration.
That's correct.
Okay. So if you could explain to me from the police perspective, what's going to be the step if they ask someone to identify themselves and they say we're working and we're doing an investigation or we're walking away? Obviously that Maryland police officer is then just going to turn and walk away.
So yes, Senator, and as was discussed with the senator from Frederick, that leads to another scenario that you could have an interaction which an officer would have to detain another officer for violating the law or for walking away from them, which then could potentially be a criminal offense.
So the criminal offense applies to what?
Not to the citation. I mean, it's a civil cite. So the violation of the mask policy is a civil offense. Full stop. What happens next if someone refuses to, pay the citation or to accept the citation is where you branch off into all the other scenarios that we discussed earlier with the senator from Frederick.
I just want to make sure that if we're creating a standard like that, right, for law enforcement to follow on any type of action, that if somebody doesn't cooperate with any order that a law enforcement officer gives them, right, that this body understands that that is now the new standard, which is not potentially a bad standard, as long as we're going to hold everybody accountable to that same standard. I think that's a pretty important standard. And just my last question is, when we talk about masking violations, is there a violation in the state of Maryland for a criminal to wear a mask? If you're committing a robbery and you have a mask on, Jesse James, was there an enhanced penalty in Maryland for that?
Not that I'm aware of for obscuring your identity during the commission of a crime.
Thank you.
All right. On the favorable report as amended, any further discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is amended. Are there amendments to the bill or its title? Recognize the senator from Baltimore and Carroll counties has an amendment. Pages will please collect the senator's amendment. We will distribute them, our first amendments of the year. So Pages, please just feel free to get it to the desk. It doesn't have to be handed. We just want to make sure that folks have it. All right, we'll make sure we deliver once it's on the board. Senator may explain the amendment.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Rather than explain it colloquially, the easier thing to do is read it because it's only two sentences long. So, and the sentences describe what the amendment does. So, first sentence, a law enforcement agency that has probable cause to believe a law enforcement officer, i.e. ICE, has committed a violation of this section shall notify the Attorney General of the violation. Second sentence, on receiving notice from a law enforcement agency under paragraph 1 of this subsection, the Attorney General shall bring in action to enjoin the violation of this section in a court of competent jurisdiction. So that is what this amendment does. And could I explain the amendment if I could?
Senator may proceed.
Thank you. The floor leader admitted or agreed with me a couple of moments ago that this matter, the constitutionality of this bill, is ultimately going to be resolved in litigation, and that the Attorney General of Maryland will be representing the state of Maryland in that litigation. So that is how this is going to end up. Now, adverting to the colloquy between my colleague from the 4th Legislative District and the floor leader earlier on, we face, if we don't have the Attorney General do this immediately, which this amendment requires, we face confrontations between local law enforcement officers and federal law enforcement officers. Now, the suggestion was made that it hasn't happened in California. But the floor leader admitted that in California, there was litigation filed prior to the effective date of the bill. So in California, there have been no such confrontations because litigation already ensued and was being pursued in the courts. So there was no need for confrontations in California because the litigation was underway. In Maryland, if we do not have the litigation underway, we are going to have confrontations on the streets of our towns and cities between local law enforcement officers and ICE agents after this bill takes effect. This amendment would obviate that because this amendment requires that instead of accosting an ICE agent a local law enforcement agent who has probable cause to believe that an ICE agent has committed a violation of this section, i.e. wearing a mask, shall notify the Attorney General of the state. And then, upon such notification, the Attorney General shall bring an action in the relevant court to enjoin the violation, thereby starting the process of resolving the constitutional issue by litigation rather than by confrontations on the streets of our cities and towns. I recommend this amendment.
All right, Senator has moved the amendment. Let's hear from the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Senator, for the amendment. And I think it's a clever idea, but two things. One is that I haven't had an opportunity, and I don't know if you have either, if the senator has, to consult with the Attorney General to see how this might actually work, and if the Attorney General has the resources and the capability to enforce this statute if it were to go into law. So having not had that conversation, I hesitate to move forward at this juncture with it. Second is, although California has had a pre-implementation lawsuit filed, and so the senator is correct, you have not seen this play out in California, I would then point to Minnesota and Minneapolis, where you have witnessed daily constitutional violations that ICE is engaged in and illegal behavior all throughout the streets. And local law enforcement has not had that type of interaction under those circumstances. Now, it doesn't deal with masks, but it does deal with illegal and unconstitutional behavior that has run rampant throughout the city of Minneapolis. And local law enforcement has not engaged in that type of interaction that we're talking about now. So I would look to that as an example to calm your fear that, or your apprehension about this aspect of the bill. And so for those reasons, I would ask the body to reject the amendment.
Thank you, Senator. All right, are there any senators who have not yet spoken on the amendment that wish to speak? Senator behind the senator from Frederick County, on the amendment.
On the amendment, Mr. President. So I want to point out that my good friend from Judicial Proceedings pointed out that, like he said, he hadn't had the opportunity to have the Attorney General really look at this amendment and find out and consult with him on it. And just like we haven't taken our responsibility to consult with our federal partners to determine, how this is going to be handled, now making this a civil offense. So I would liken it the same thing, that why are we going to move forward with something without consulting beforehand, like he said, but we've done the same thing. We haven't consulted with anybody, we're just moving it forward without consulting with the federal partners. It doesn't make any sense to me. So I understand what he's saying. So either I would like to see the floor leader make this a favorable amendment, or at least offer the opportunity to get an answer back from the AG's office on this prior to giving that decision, because here again, we're moving forward with something. We didn't consult our federal partners about their policy. We didn't try to confer with them or have any type of dialogue with them to find a meaningful solution that has, that'll mitigate these fears and concerns. But we're just going to move it through, and we haven't consulted with the AG, but we're not going to wait to consult with the AG. We're just going to keep moving forward. That's not good leadership. That's just driving something home without solid legal standing. And I would urge the body to support the amendment.
All right, question remains on the amendment. Any further discussion on the amendment? For senators who have not yet spoken, wish to speak, recognize the minority whip.
I'd just like to request a roll call on the amendment.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Recognize the maker of the amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The floor leader adverted to Minnesota. The whole purpose of this amendment is to avoid happening in Maryland what is happening in Minnesota. We do not want strife in the streets with different bodies of law enforcement officers going against each other. The whole purpose of this amendment is to immediately move the matter into the courts, where it ultimately is going to be resolved, as the floor leader indicated, and have the Attorney General represent the state of Maryland in bringing an action of an injunction against ICE from violating Maryland law. That's how this will be resolved, and that's how it should start. We should not start with strife in the streets. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. All right, question remains on the amendment. Any further discussion? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote? explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the almost in a second the call. All right, with 30 votes in the negative, the senator's amendment fails. Are there further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 1 is ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill. Oh, I'm sorry. If there was are there a further amendment on Senate Bill? If there's a further amendment, we can take up the amendment. Senator has another amendment. Please, pages will collect and distribute the senator's amendment. I really thought it was. All right. Pages are distributing the amendment. Give us just a moment. All right, Senator may explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. This one is equally easy to describe. It merely reduces the penalty that an ICE agent would have to pay for violating this from $1,500 to $100. Now, ICE agents are working Americans just like our police officers. $1,500 for a working class person is a lot of money, and the prospect of having to pay $1,500 is only going to exacerbate the situation in the street. When an ICE officer is accosted by a local law enforcement officer and told, you're violating our law, this means a $1,500 penalty that you're going to have to pay, and I want your identifying information. What do you think the likelihood is that the ICE officer is going to cooperate, or alternatively say, excuse me, you're obstructing my ability to exercise my duties as an ICE agent, and then you've got the confrontation that I'm worried about. So I'm hoping that the reduction in the penalty will reduce the level of confrontation on the streets. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Has moved the amendment. Let's hear from the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just again, going back to the number of exceptions and the level of scrutiny that the MPTSC will accord to the future exceptions that are going to be developed, the situations in which someone would violate this are very, very serious, undermine public safety, and put officers and civilians in jeopardy. So I'd ask the body to resist the amendment as the fine is in accordance with the level of offense.
All right. On the amendment, further discussion. Recognize Senator from District 6 on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a question for the maker of the amendment.
Senator may proceed.
Yes.
Thank you. What other laws or types of fines are they out there similar to this that are $1,500 or more? Are there any?
Well, I'm not aware of it, but I've done the research. I think the floor leader perhaps is on the phone with someone back in committee who could answer that question.
If you could, Mr. President.
Yield to the floor leader.
I'm sorry, Senator, Mr. President. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah,
sorry.
what other type of fines can we relate to this that are $1,500 or more to this type of bill?
We found one for instance, like Board of Elections fines for us are $2,000.
Well, Board of Elections, okay, but I'm talking about like
they can
fines
issue
like
for
this,
us.
for this.
Senator, yeah.
So,
I mean, they're a wide range, but just for as an example, if something is like a Board of Elections fine, $2,000, wearing a mask under the conditions of when you're engaging in public operation, terrorizing people, I think rises far above that.
So, but you're saying right off the bat, we're just going to hit them at $1,500. So we're not going to, like a second offense most of the time can reach that, but we're not going to go to a place maybe like $100 to get their attention. But we're saying we're going to hit them at $1,500, which I think is really above and beyond.
Senator, again, given the exceptions, the scenario in which this would happen, someone would violate this statute, I think the $1,500 fine is
Thank
more
you.
than
Thank you. I appreciate it. Mr. President, if I could just say,
Sir, may proceed.
This is a very reasonable thing I think we can do. Again, we're trying to get their attention. If there's a violation, I understand the fine, Mr. President, but I think at the same time, we can do better than this, and I hope we can support this amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. All right, Senator from Frederick County on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. With the floor leader, in regards to the last line of questioning, could the floor leader please respond or yield to a question?
Will the floor leader yield for a question on the amendment?
Thank you. Senator, you mentioned that the only one you were able to find was the Board of Elections and that it was fined, it's like $1,500 equivalent. to us, is what you said. But actually, that's not the case. It goes to the committee to elect us, correct?
It's just one
We're
fine.
not personally cited. Our committee
That's
our
correct.
campaign account, our campaign committee to elect is the one cited. Is that correct?
Yes, but yes, Senator, there are a number of other offenses that I can produce a long, lengthy list for you if you'd
Nope.
like. but
I just wanted to talk about the one you brought up because I thought it was a great point. So, I think I'll be probably offering an amendment because like that fine is for the committee to elect us if we do something with an integrity violation or the like, or some type of campaign issue. Why don't we just cite the federal government instead of the actual employee and the performance in their official capacity of their job?
So the fine is used as a deterrent effect for the officer's conduct. It's more than appropriate, given the exceptions that are provided for in the statute and through the MPTSC regulations. I think is more than fair and appropriate, given the context and scenario in which a violation of this statute would happen as a matter of public safety.
Okay. And so the difference between what you brought up about, like the example for the campaign violation, and this one is there's actually a temporary detention. We don't get detained until we pay our fine. But this one involves the actual temporary detention to issue an actual paper DC 28 civil citation form, does it not?
Senator, as we've gone over a number of times, yes.
Well, I'm just pointing out. So this one's different. So my question then next one is, Senator, is what other civil violations that are issued on a civil citation, not a fine, that is not actually issued after a temporary detention, after an investigation by a body. Actually, I'm asking what other civil violations do we have that we issue DC 28 civil violations while detaining a person up to $1,500 fine?
I don't have, I'll do some research on that. I don't have the answer to that question right now. Very nuanced question, but I will get that research to you.
Okay. I believe the answer you're going to find is none, but thank you for your time.
All right, on the amendment, further discussion? If not, all in favor of the amendment say aye. Opposed, nay. Noes have it. Senator's amendment is defeated. Further amendments? Yes, recognize the minority whip on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr.
Or has an amendment. Pages will collect and distribute the senator's amendment.
Oh, it's a big stack there. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Give us just a moment to get it up on the board here, Senator. Senator may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think the discussion today has been helpful in understanding some of the issues. I know that these bills that we're going to deal with today, this one and the one that's next, the chairman mentioned some of the context that's going on nationally. I have, and I think you're hearing, we have maybe a little bit of a different view. I don't think anybody here, in fact, indeed, Tom Homan just had a press conference where he talked about a number of issues that ICE is facing. They're enforcing the law, which is the law that's been passed by Congress and not been changed. He had some very strong comments about the things that they are stopping by deporting violent criminals and people who've committed very bad acts in our community. And while they're doing it, they're finding people also here illegally, and yes, those people will be deported. He also acknowledged that, yes, there's room for improvement in things that any government agency does, including Immigration and Customs Enforcement. None of us want to see what has been happening in Minnesota on our streets. But if you're going to talk about the context of the death of two protesters who, one is under investigation, well, both are under investigation, but if you want to talk about that context and some of the ugly scenes we've seen in Minneapolis, you also have to understand the context that our brave men and women in federal law enforcement that work for Immigration and Customs Enforcement have been undergoing since really January of this last year. Somehow, many years ago, it was okay for CNN to do a ride-along with ICE while they went and actively deported people. President Obama gave Tom Homan, who's still in a position of authority, Presidential Medal of Freedom for his work in enforcing our borders and involved in deporting criminal illegal immigrants. But somehow now, when we have a presidential election where one of the top things that was talked about was securing the border and getting a handle on illegal immigration, somehow, right away, it became this hostile sort of attack on the agencies that's doing it. It's not to say that every ICE agent that's out there has performed perfectly by any means, that there's not a need for things to, in some cases, different things to be different things to be training or other types of things that need to be stepped up. But it's just important to understand, and I have an article here, and I think that I've found, and this is just one article in the press, but in the last year, assaults against ICE are up 1,300%. Vehicular attacks on ICE officers up 3,200%. Death threats up 8,000%. And we may talk about that some more with some of the other bills, but it's very clear that there's been a targeting, not just what's happening in Minnesota, where there have been some things that we all are not happy or sad about, don't like to see, but in many parts of the country where there's a resistance to enforcing active current immigration law, there is not just a hostility, and people are allowed to peacefully protest all they want to, and we should encourage that. There's been a violent level, and there's been a doxing, yes, of ICE officers. And I'm not just talking about ones that are involved in some sort of altercation like we saw recently in Minnesota. I'm talking about, from the very beginning, people sticking cameras in these officers' faces, putting their information out online, targeting them and their families. And it's wrong. And so the reaction of ICE officers has been many times to mask up. And I don't blame them, and I don't think we should be passing this bill at all. And I think it's been clear from the excellent debate we've had that what we're passing is not going to do anything on this. It's only going to mean that we mandate this for state officers, and that's a different discussion. But it's not going to do anything. It's a supremacy clause. I mean, we can stand here and spend all this time on it. It's not going to do anything. However, I do believe we ought to level the playing field a little bit. If we're going to ban masking, then people who are protesting should not be masking up either. And what we've seen, there's a tactic that's been used over and over again, really since, I think even since back during some of the COVID era, when we had a number of protests about policing. And there's this tactic, and I'm not saying it's been used by everybody protesting, a lot of peaceful protesters that are expressing their opinion, but there are people, targeted groups, and a lot of times it's astroturfed by some shadowy funded nonprofits and groups that will get these protesters, and there's a particular kind of activist that's going to show up and shove a camera in your face, is going to yell at you, scream at you, and try to target you, but they can have masks and everything all over their face. So an officer who's trying to do their job, enforcing immigration law or other types of actions, is dealing with protesters, and I use that term loosely because when you're inserting yourself, it's different than standing there and saying, I don't like this. They get to be masked and hide their identity. So I think if what's good for the goose is good for the gander, which I think is something my friend from Baltimore County would say, I think I've heard him say that on this floor. So my amendment would simply say we're going to apply the same standard to protesters that we are to ICE officers with this amendment. It has the same exemptions and exceptions for health and safety and other things that are in there for the officers. So I would move my amendment, Mr. President.
All right, Senator moves the amendment. Recognize the Majority Leader on the amendment.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. President. I hear what the good senator has to say, but I'm thinking as I'm listening about the situation that I have in my community right now. I have a large group of immigrants that live in my community. They're petrified to even go to the grocery store because on both sides of the door, we have ICE representatives standing there screening people going into the grocery store. My families are petrified. They've been separated. We had one couple that got taken back to El Salvador and left behind were their 4 children, with the oldest one in middle school who is left to take care of the family. My community is petrified. And when they see somebody coming up to them with a mask on, it makes it even worse. And I can't even imagine what they live with day after day after day. And these are people that are here legally. So that's my 2 cents anyway.
All right, let's check with the floor leader on the amendment. Does the floor leader speak on the amendment? 2.
So yes, I'd ask the body to resist this amendment. I think it's a policy call, obviously, and there's a fundamental difference between citizens engaging in the democratic process and vocalizing their opposition in a peaceful manner, and a law enforcement agency coming in and acting in unconstitutional manners. Now, for the point of, if someone's breaking the law, they will be, protester or not, they will be held accountable, and I fully agree with you with that. So if someone is intimidating an officer, someone's shoving something into their face, someone's harassing an officer by doxing them and then threatening their family, everyone should be held fully accountable for any of that conduct. And so for those reasons, I think it's a policy decision that this body's gonna have to make, that there's a fundamental difference between average everyday citizens engaged in the democratic process and a law enforcement agency coming in under these circumstances that we've led through, with the exceptions for health, safety, and the appropriate weather conditions, all of those things. The conditions in which they would be operating is just fundamentally different, and I think it's a policy decision that I'm asking this body to resist the amendment.
All right, on the amendment, any senators who have not yet spoken wish to speak? If not, back to the maker of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would ask for a roll call, and just I guess closing on comments on this amendment. And my friend, the majority leader, who I know cares deeply for her community, as we all do, I feel like the point she was making perhaps was the point I'm making, in that a lot of times these protests end up becoming very ugly, intimidating, and nasty to people around them as well, because of hostility, and masking adds to that hostility. I actually understand the underlying argument about the masking, even though I don't agree with how we're targeting ICE in this way. I understand the discussion. I don't think I don't come down on that side of it, but I understand the discussion. But I think, again, if I was being charitable about this bill, I would say I understand the desire to de-escalate tensions. And I feel like my amendment would help that in that regard as well. De-escalating tensions around protest, it's not legit. It's to protest and cover your face outside of the exceptions that are in the bill already, to me is adding to that hostility and tension. So, Mr. President, I would press my amendment and ask for a roll call.
All right, on the amendment, any further discussion? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 32 votes in the negative, the senator's amendment fails. Pierce Senator from District 1 has an amendment. Pages will collect and distribute the senator's amendment.
As that's being distributed, Mr. President, I wanted to start off with good morning, sir.
Good morning.
I want to be graceful, respectful, but more especially thoughtful as we go through this deliberation.
Appreciate that. The Senator of Maryland, appreciate it. Senator may proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I have a series of a couple amendments that I believe will tighten up, produce a better product, but more especially ensure the protection of due process. My first amendment, if the floor leader may rise, Mr. President.
Senator has moved the amendment, recognizing the floor leader on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Floor Leader, so my first amendment, if you look at page 2, following line 24, The new paragraph, second line, my amendment strikes the word absolutely. And the premise or the background of my amendment is that it should be just necessary. Absolute necessary might only apply to the temperature is extreme, like below 0, causing frostbite and brief exposure. Unreasonable if you're asking police officers working outside in the cold. It would be contradiction of this bill provision that the following applicable laws of this occupational health and safety that we had mentioned when Senator from District 29 mentioned OSHA. It contradicts the provision that's laid out in OSHA. And so therefore, I ask that we move this to make it more clear and understanding and align it with OSHA provision.
All right, the senator's moved the amendment. Let's check with the floor leader on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would just say this amendment's not necessary. I mean, I was looking to council, and there's already an OSHA on page 3 of the bill, an OSHA kind of exception. Yeah, but also the way that this is constructed, the MPTSC has elasticity and flexibility to develop those standards. So I think it's just not necessary, and so I would ask the body to reject the amendment.
All right. Senator may proceed.
Certainly, Mr. President, I understand that. Thank you, Mr. Floor Leader. I tend to believe that words matter and definitions matter. That's why I believe that we should pass the amendment, and I ask for a roll call.
All right, senators requested a roll call vote. Any further discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 32 votes in the negative, senator's amendment fails. Senator has another amendment. Pages will collect and distribute the senator's amendment.
Whoops. This amendment, Mr. President, actually is making it a better product. On page 3, line 11, the following says medical grade. Now, a medical grade or a surgical mask does not cover, that word, that language, does not cover the N95 respirators that many police officers who are required to wear during the pandemic to protect them from COVID-19 infection. N95 is not masks, and therefore the respirator does not fit the testing under the MOSHA regulations. And so therefore, striking out medical grade and inserting N95 respirator, I think gives us a better product and cleans up the language.
Just a clarification, Senator, on this is insert, not strike.
That is correct. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. Just
thank you, because I did say words matter. So
Sen-
thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, just making sure. All right, senators, move the amendment. Check the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the attention, but I think it may unintentionally actually narrow the exceptions for the bill by providing for a higher standard. So if you had a lower grade mask that you were using for just a normal cold or the flu, for instance, it wouldn't be allowed. So I think I appreciate the intent of it, but I think it actually narrows the exceptions. And so for that reason, I would ask the body to resist it.
All right.
There again, same line before. I request a favorable on this amendment and ask for a roll call, sir.
Senators request a roll call vote. Any further discussion? Yes, recognize Senator from Baltimore County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the floor leader yield for question?
Floor leader yield. Senator may
so
proceed.
I'm looking at this amendment, and I'm listening to you. Going back to our wonderful days back during COVID, everybody had to wear their mask. And I know COVID's over, but people sometimes still wear it. So if I was an ICE agent, I could just say, you know what? I don't want to get COVID. So guess what? I'm going to wear a N95 mask every time I go out and do a raid. Is that like a loophole for this bill now?
If the officer is doing it for their health and safety, then it's permissible.
So they all can just say that. I mean, people wear them all the time. They're saying, hey, I got a kid at home or, an elderly family member. I just don't feel like going around strangers. I want to wear this mask. So to me, it's like the whole bill's a loophole because of this being able to wear an N90 or any type of mask for health, correct?
No, I hear you. If that officer has a burden to prove that, hey, I'm doing this for my health and safety, and there you go from there. So.
Okay, thanks.
All right. On the amendment, any further discussion? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 31 votes in the negative, Senator's amendment fails. Senator has another amendment. Pages will collect and distribute the Senator's amendment. And just give us 1 second, Senator, to get it up and make sure we have the right one.
Thank you, sir.
726. All right, Senator may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. The good senator from District 5 had an amendment that was really addressing doxing, and therefore this particular amendment is going to clean up and try to help prevent doxing. On page 4, following lines 22E3(1), this will strike the address of the law enforcement officer charged and will insert agency name and agency work address. I think there again, this is a cleanup. I don't believe there should be any unintended consequences, but if we can remove the home address of the officer, I firmly believe that the Public Information Act protects home addresses from public employees from public disclosure in the General Provision Article Section 4-331. A home address of an officer should not be published. With that, I move the amendment.
All right, Senator has moved the amendment. Let's hear from the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the intent again, and Senator, obviously we are all against any sort of harassment or doxing for our law enforcement. If this citation goes public on K-Search, and I know the exception that is applicable for law enforcement or public employees that you just read out under the statute, but if anyone breaks the law, they should be treated equally. And so all the citations that are issued to any Marylander, any person that's under the jurisdiction of our laws should be treated equally. So for that reason, and right now, if a law enforcement officer breaks the law, their court case and their records would be public. So for those reasons, I think that it runs afoul of public policy and the public policy that we've established here in the state. So I would say I would reject the amendment.
Mr.
right.
President, if I may.
Senator may proceed on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Floor Leader. I understand that. We've had bills in the past where we are protecting information of judges who have been actually murdered. So I tend to believe that we have gone away from that. And in this case, I think we all do agree that doxing is not right. But to remove the home address of the officer, I believe is prudent. And I also tend to believe that, as I started out, we need to protect due process. And having the officer's home address only inspires somebody to do something negative. And with that, I press the amendment.
All right. Thank you, Senator. On the amendment, recognize Senator from Frederick County on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. If the floor leader, I do want to ask for a roll call, Mr. President, but if the floor leader could yield for a question, please.
Floor leader yield. Senator may proceed.
Senator, after the terrible circumstances that we've seen with our judges here locally, unfortunately dying at the hands of someone after the handing down of a sentence happened in Washington County, after the terrible events that happened to a Minneapolis or a lawmaker from Minnesota who was gunned down at her home after taking a very unfavorable vote, according to the suspect. Did this body take any measures to protect our members' addresses?
Not our members' addresses, Senator, but for the judiciary, yes, we did.
So we didn't do anything to protect our addresses, to put them in place to not make them open, that we could shield our addresses?
No, Senator, I mean, obviously there's an address confidentiality program not applicable directly to us, but no, we entertained that piece of legislation. We did not ultimately pass it. We did for the judges, though.
We did for the judges. So the one that hands down so we didn't do it after the execution of the Minnesota lawmaker for lawmakers. I still thought we had some protection. I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. I still thought something allowed us to have insulated addresses on the heels of that. I think DLS did that.
Maybe the policy for the department, the Board of Elections, I think, has shielded private addresses for when you're for your campaign committee. Yeah. But this body didn't pass a piece of legislation for lawmakers specifically.
So we put something to shield that. By Board of Elections, we've done something for those that hand down. So the lawmakers, we've done something to protect those that hand down the sentences. But what we're doing is, and I want to point this out again, for a civil, not criminal violation, we are now jeopardizing unnecessarily putting out home addresses of those that are working within the framework, the legal framework of our immigration laws, not a criminal act. When you were talking about earlier about charges and things happening that it's been done, I agree. When they're charged with something criminal, that's a different circumstance because it's outside their purview of their sworn oath and responsibility. We're talking about officers that are not acting outside the guise of their role and responsibility in the federal government. We're talking about a law, a civil violation that this body's passing without training those same officers on that law to make accountability. And now we're going to add a separate note in it that allows us to put out and not insulate their home address where their families are. I think if any of us had an 8,000% increase in death threats, this body would lock down and start protecting their members and their addresses right away, because nobody wants anybody protesting or endangering their kids. And I can tell you, there's no ICE agent that wants to go out in the performance of their sworn oath and do their job and deal with everything we're seeing on the news. The last thing they want to do is take that home. No police officer ever wants to take their job home because you see some of the most horrific things. We don't want to take it home. We want to shield our family, our loved ones from that. What this does is not only would this take it home, but it would take it home when they're not there to protect their family. And there's nobody in this body that should vote for something that would endanger their own families on a civil violation. And with that, I would urge the body to accept that amendment.
Thank you, Senator. All right, any senators who have not yet spoken wish to speak? If Senator from District 6 on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think this amendment is very important to every one of us because there are some here that have been attacked. And I could say right off the bat, Mr. President, I had one of my delegates that an individual went to his home because he had his address. And that was very upsetting to me. And the thing is that it comes down to, it comes down to this. Safety. Safety is what it's all about. We want every person to be safe. We want our neighbors, we want our family members, but we want every person in this room to be safe. And making sure anything like this that doesn't happen to them, it becomes very personal. So it comes down to, I don't want my address out there for everybody to know. If I had somebody that wants to attack me, even though I had somebody attack me a couple of years ago. But I don't want anybody to be compromised in any way. And it shouldn't come down to that, Mr. President. And all I'm saying is that we need to protect each other. We need to protect our families. Because God made our families first before he made a church. Families are very important to all of us. So we need to make that a priority, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. All right, any senators who have not yet spoken wish to speak? Not, let's, Mr. Floor Leader, any further discussion before we vote?
Sure. Thanks, Mr. President. I'll just say, look, I mean, if an officer is pulled over for speeding, which is criminal, that information is made public. If an officer is cited for smoking cannabis, which is civil, that information is made public today. I know Triple E is considering a bill that will have a bill before them that will talk about shielding of legislative addresses under certain circumstances. I'm very sensitive to your concern, Senator, because you may know I've had people show up to my house, as has the vice chair. So keenly aware and sensitive to those dynamics, but I'd ask the body to resist this amendment.
Thank you, Senator. All right, Senator from District 1 on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to press the amendment. I know the intention of this body to protect that in the future, but this amendment actually takes care of it today. And with that, I'd ask for a roll call vote.
All right, any further discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote? Explain their vote. If not, the clerk will take the call. With 28 votes in the negative, the Senator's amendment fails. Further amendments to the bill or its title? Triple checking. If not, Senate Bill 1 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will now read the next bill.
Senate Bill 245, Senator Smith, Public Safety Immigration Enforcement Agreements, Prohibition, favorable.
Senate Bill 245, recognizing the chair of the committee as the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. This bill prohibits the state, a unit of local government, a county sheriff, or any agency, officer, employee, or agent of the state or a unit of local government from entering into an immigration enforcement agreement by July 1st, 2026. Any such entity with an existing immigration enforcement agreement must exercise that termination clause provision within that agreement. Mr. President, there are no committee amendments. I'd move for the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leaders move for the adoption of the favorable committee report. On the report, recognize the minority whip.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wonder if the floor leader, the chairman, would yield for questions.
Will the floor leader yield? Appears so. Senator may proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, well, Mr. President, I will question. Mr. Chairman, does this legislation now eliminate immigration enforcement in Maryland?
No.
Does it eliminate detainers or that any of that kind of?
No.
Okay. So does it eliminate the ability of a local police force, county sheriff, county sheriff's department, county police force? Does it eliminate their ability to coordinate with ICE?
It eliminates their ability to engage in a formal memoranda of understanding, so a formal agreement. That's what it eliminates.
Because the 287G program, and there's actually, it's interesting, over the years we've had a lot of legislation about 287G, so I learned quite a bit, but I dived into it a little bit more. There's multiple models of 287G. So we only have 2 of those models operating in Maryland. One of them deals with the one that people are probably most familiar with, which deals with going through it's called the jail enforcement model, which you identify and process removable illegal immigrants that have either criminal or pending criminal charges once they're arrested and brought into the jail. They're arrested for other things and brought into the jail. There's also the Warrant Service Officer Program, which allows training, certification, authorization for state and local law enforcements to execute administrative warrants on these illegal immigrants in their agency's jail. So that's actually kind of a step down from the jail program. Those are the only 2 models that are operating. There is other models that operate that are more aggressive. We don't have that in Maryland. So those 287G program models, it's just clear to me, I've been frustrated, and I'm getting to a question in a moment, but I've been frustrated with some of the misinformation that goes out about 287G. I think, and it's been interesting to me, in my community, I've had people email me that think that means that our sheriff's department is just going out and grabbing people off the street, which is not accurate. ICE doesn't just go grab anybody off the street, by the way. There has to be somebody that they have reason to grab. They can't just be like, oh, you look funny, I'm going to take you. The sheriff's departments in these 287G programs, They have it's a written MOU with training, modest amount of training funds and training that comes from Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It's not much different from the way that it allows the Sheriff's Department to run a search using federal resources to find out anybody who comes into the jail, if they're running this model, gets run through the system. Doesn't matter what you look like, doesn't matter your age, gender, doesn't matter. You get run through the system, and if it flags you, then it flags you as it's here illegally. It's not them going out on the street grabbing people. It's also the concerns we all should have about due process. There's no due process violations with this. Someone who's not here illegally is not going to be sent somewhere because of 287G that they shouldn't be. Even someone who is found to be suspected to be here illegally then would have to go through, if they have not already gone through the process, has to go through the process of immigration courts. Is anything that I'm saying incorrect here?
So you had me, Senator, until you got to the due process piece and a potential Fourth Amendment violation. So under the two models that we have, and I'll be quick, we have the jail enforcement model and the warrant service officer model. If someone is held on a civil detainer for that 48-hour period of time, after they would have been released for the underlying crime that they are suspected of, that is a Fourth Amendment violation. And you are also speeding past any sort of due process procedure because that person has not been convicted of a crime, they've been charged. And so I would just take exception to how the senator characterized the due process piece.
Okay.
And we could talk a little bit more about it later, but so far you've described the process accurately. The senator has described the process accurately.
Well, it's interesting because if someone is brought into the jail, let's say they're picked up for, I don't know, burglary. Let's use something a little less, and there's some real bad cases on this, but let's say burglary. And you have been arrested, and then they determine that you are here illegally in the country. They don't just deport you. They don't call ICE and ICE deports you. You have to then be taken through the immigration enforcement process it has to be proven in an immigration court that you're here illegally. So there's no due process violation with that. You're suspected of being here illegally with probable cause. You go to immigration process. How is that a violation of their due process?
So, Senator, the violation of due process comes because the reason you're removing someone or trying to remove someone, I mean, it's a civil offense to being here.
It's a misdemeanor.
Not yet. So the person has not been convicted of a crime. That's one thing that's separate. But for the Fourth Amendment violation happens when you hold that person past the point which you could for the underlying offense. And so for you to hold someone because there's been a civil ICE detainer put on them, that is a violation of the Fourth Amendment.
A detainer is, Mr. President, if I continue, that a detainer is, ICE does not just put a detainer on everybody that they have in their records that's here illegally. Like they don't go through and say, oh, everybody that's here illegally in the country in our records has a detainer on. That's not how it works. Detainer's been put on for very specific reasons, correct?
So, Senator, under normal times, I would still question that premise, but certainly today, I would have to disagree with you on that underlying premise that detainers are not being issued for a wide array of folks, the vast majority of whom are tax-paying residents, people who do not have criminal records. People who are supporting families, paying into our tax base, and contributing to the fabric of our community every day. So I would contest that underlying assumption.
Well, up through today, 70% of the people removed from the country with a detainer from ICE have been people who have been convicted of or suspected of very serious crimes or wanted internationally. Now, that 30% beyond that, there may be some folks there who only broke the law coming in illegally. But generally, even in those cases, it's multiple times they've been here illegally. So I would say we're not at the point where, again, being here illegally is still breaking the law. But I think that when people hear about the violation of due process, what they're assuming is that nobody's getting their day in court, and that's not true. That's not true. You'll get your day in court. If ICE says if the federal government, we shouldn't say ICE because they're the enforcement on this. If the federal government says you are here illegally and charges you and says you're here illegally, you will get your day in court. They can't deport you without you having due process. So we've set up this sophisticated system in our country where you get a bunch of different appeals and a bunch of different things, but the bottom line is the due process part is you can't deport somebody who's a citizen. You can't deport somebody who's here legally unless they do something that forfeits their ability to be here legally, which is another part of this program. So I just think that's important. Let me follow up with this question. How we have several counties participating in this by their choice. Are other counties in the state that do not have a 287G, are they communicating with ICE when there's someone who really is a dangerous criminal? Yep. So somebody who's committed, or forget the word dangerous even, but has committed serious crimes. How's that happening in other counties?
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. President. And I don't want to belabor this debate, but I do have to push back on a couple of the narrative pieces that the senator started off with. I just do have a couple of just statistics here from Maryland-specific statistics, but from January to October of 2025, in the counties that had 287G agreements, for all or part of the year, ICE placed 319 detainers. 214 of those, or 67%, were for individuals with no criminal convictions at all. In 2023, 100% of Hartford County detainers and 83% of Cecil County detainers were for people who had no conviction. So I would just have to push back on the starting narrative of that piece. And then for the due process, you are technically correct on everyone's going to go through an immigration proceeding. But let's understand what due process looks like today under this administration in this process. And I can think of no more stark example than what's happening in the Baltimore City Detention Center, where you have what I could describe as nothing short of human rights violations, where people are being held, packed in like sardines, lack of food, lack of sleep, lack of accommodation. That's what due process looks like right now. And so I think we have to all ask ourselves, under these conditions and this environment, are we going to be complicit and allow for this? I say no, right? So I just want to push back on that. To answer your question, there are some counties that have policies, not formal agreements, policies to cooperate with Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
How do they justify who they recommend to ICE versus who they don't?
Senator, the policies vary. The one that I'm most familiar with, which I hazard to kind of point to because it's changing as we speak, they kind of have a tiered system of more violent, serious offenses, and then kind of walking down the ladder from there to see when they'll cooperate or when they'll initiate contact with ICE.
So there's there written documentation that tells us what this process is of evaluation?
Yes, Senator, there is a policy that some counties have, a written policy.
A written policy. That is there oversight over how that is getting enforced?
How do you mean Senator? How does the senator mean oversight?
Does the elected leadership of that county have the ability to, or is there a process to be sure that everyone goes through that same screening to check if they're here legally and if there's other things that is needed? Like if they're here illegally, legally, is everybody going through that screening process that comes into the county jail, for example?
Senator, the one that I'm most familiar with, again, is everyone is screened the same way. The accountability piece, Senator, comes from the local chief sheriff, the county executive, and the county council, the local governing body that has oversight responsibility for the local law enforcement agency.
But there's no law that requires them. There's no Maryland state law or federal law that they are under, correct?
That's correct. No, there is not. And if there was a federal law, that would be violative of the 10th Amendment.
Well, that's right. But I think the point with the 287G is you have a written, documented process, and everyone is treated equally that comes into, for example, the Frederick County Jail, which I'm more familiar with than I know Hartford also does it. Carroll is doing more the warrant program, which is similar, but is a little bit of a step down. Everyone comes through the screening, and that they're finding who is here illegally. And I got to tell you, if you don't want to end up, if you're concerned about due process, to me, the idea of every county having a little different way they're doing it and it not be in their county law or in any sort of state law, I would prefer to have. I don't quite understand why we don't want everybody to actually do 287G and have it totally documented and transparent. Instead, we have counties that can pick and choose how they do it. To me, that's more ripe for profiling and targeting. It's also ripe for, as we've said, people slipping through the cracks that could have been deported and then go and commit really serious acts once they're out of the. Maybe they got picked up for burglary and then they're let go because it wasn't a tier 1 offense. They're here illegally, could have gotten them out of here, but instead they're out and now they're committing a more serious crime, which we've seen in Fairfax County and some other places in other states. I know I'm supposed to be asking you a question, but I guess the question is, are we not? I feel like this bill is being cast as the idea that we're going to, this will get rid of all these, we'll get ICE out of here, get rid of all these deportations, it's going to protect everybody. And it's like, well, no, actually, 287G is more protective of people. There's a process they follow. And actually, if ICE does deport someone or suddenly takes someone from one of these jail programs, the sheriff's department can actually help find out where they're going and what's going on with them, because we know since we don't let them house anybody here, we miss out on those dollars, and then also they get shipped to other places away from their families, which was a foolish policy we passed a number of years ago. But so I don't know why we wouldn't want everybody to be doing 287G. Plus, we get funding for it. So I mean, can you explain to me why we're not going the other way, so that we make sure we don't have counties doing rogue things where they've sort of decided their own little tier system?
Thank you, Senator. So not that I'm supporting or condemning a certain policy. I just say that there is a level of local accountability with those policies, and jurisdictions can be responsive to the wants and needs of their electorate. So there's a level of political accountability that does not exist under the agreements, which require broad sweeping mandates, broad sweeping collaboration. And when you have that, you have people that are ensnared, people who are accused of very minor offenses, subject to what could otherwise only be described as a deportation pipeline, and there's indiscriminate application there. At least with these policies, there is more discretion. Not that I am promoting or saying that I agree with those policies, but that's the difference. That's the distinction between the two. And also there's more political accountability to those local jurisdictions, and I suspect you're going to see more vigorous debate in our local jurisdictions about those policies in the weeks to come.
Well, I mean, that may be. You call it indiscriminate. I would say if you're here illegally, you're going to be in trouble. If you're not, you don't have anything to worry about. So, I mean, that to me, it's not indiscriminate. You're breaking the law being here illegally. Now, we understand there are people in different circumstances. It's not one size fits all from that perspective. But generally speaking, again, with 287G, if you're not interacting with the criminal justice system additionally, you'll never have a problem in a county that has 287G with immigration and customs enforcement, because they're working through the local law enforcement. They're not generally, unless they're looking for someone real dangerous, they're not devoting resources to coming in and finding people, because they're working with the local law enforcement. You get rid of 287G, they have to now come in, don't they? If they have a detainer, putting aside how you feel about ICE or about deporting people who are here illegally that haven't committed any additional crimes, but we all agree that if ICE finds out, hey, there's this guy's an illegal immigrant, and they've committed some real serious bad acts, we want them to be deported. We want them out of here. We want them to face justice and be gotten out of here. So ICE is going to come do that. And they'll come do that whether Joe Biden is president or whether Donald Trump is president or whoever. It's not going to matter. They're going to come do their job. They may be more aggressive under this president, but they're going to come do their job. So by getting rid of this common sense documented process and foregoing that for a process that each county can kind of pick and choose how they do it, aren't we actually inviting more trouble? And it's not a threat. I've heard people say this. They say, oh, it's a threat. You're threatening that ICE will come. It's like, no, they just have to come do their job, and they have to put more boots on the ground. Aren't we inviting that? Wouldn't it be better to take a step back from that?
Sure. Well, first, I'd say, Senator, I mean, you had the honor and distinction of serving on the Judicial Proceedings Committee once upon a time, and the senator knows that every year we create more offenses and we try to make course corrections on one end, but there are several hundreds, thousands of incarcerable offenses on our books, and we create more every year. And depending on whose shoes you walk in, I think you're more susceptible to the criminal justice system than others. I think that's well documented. So I just put that there first. Second is that if you are a threat to public safety, if you are a danger to yourself or others, every element of law enforcement will be going after you to hold you accountable to the law, regardless of your citizenship. You don't need 287G programs for that. In fact, with the 287G programs, it drives people away from the criminal justice system who would otherwise cooperate to help solve crime and to increase public safety. So in that regard, it's very detrimental to public safety. Again, if someone is incarcerated, let's say someone is convicted, that means they've gone through due process and they are incarcerated, there is a federal program that allows for a detainer to be issued and for ICE to get that person after they have completed or during their period of incarceration, but after they have been convicted of a crime. It's called the CAP program, the Criminal Aliens Program. So there are mechanisms to hold people accountable who have been convicted and have gone through due process, and that's the way we should do it.
I want to clarify something, because I know we can go back and forth on how to best enforce immigration. There are folks in this body, I think, that would prefer us not really enforce it much at all. Some of us are probably a little more hardline on it. We have a housing crisis. We have a lot of issues. We don't, we could go back and forth on it. That's not the point of this exercise. I think it is important, going back to talking about some of the, I call them myths. Some people might disagree, but I call them myths about 287G. There's also, I mentioned it earlier, but there's a myth that it means that your officers are out crashing through the underbrush to find people, which is not something that the chair has said, but I hear it a lot. And I also think people are being told this is going to help stop all this enforcement from happening. It's not. It's not at all. But it is, I just want to be clear, there are no sworn police officers in a county sheriff's department taking part in immigration and customs enforcement.
That's correct? That's correct.
Correct. It's only corrections officers once someone's already interfaced come to the jail for other reasons.
That's correct.
Is that the case? Is that going to be the case in every county that doesn't have 287G? Or could the counties decide maybe we will take part in assisting?
So we passed a piece of legislation that prevents any state or local law enforcement officer from engaging in that field enforcement or the task force model. So that would not be permissible, and it is not now, and it will remain so.
I actually, though I am pro-enforcement on these issues, I actually think you definitely want the right training for that. There's no question about that. But again, just in closing my questioning then, Mr. President, I just making it clear, 287G is actually, I think, an incredibly safe and common sense program. It was actually expanded in the I think it was created under George W. Bush, but was expanded in the Obama administration. That's when Harford County started, was under the Obama administration. They expanded the program. It's a way to calmly, safely deal with this major problem of millions and millions of people who've come to the country illegally, some of them with the best of motivations, but let's be honest, we've seen it. A lot of people have come to this country illegally the last few years with not good intentions. And so we need to figure out, we've got to process that, and 287G is a documented program that works. The Frederick County Sheriff tells an anecdote that when the Trump administration took over, they obviously were going to increase enforcement. They looked at the Western Maryland counties, and they were targeting, I think it was like 65 people that were really, serious, worst of the worst kind of criminals who were also here illegally. Frederick County only had 2 of them that they knew of because they had been removing people who were here illegally that shouldn't be here, including those bad criminal actors. Frederick County, of those 4 counties, obviously has the most population. So that's very telling. It's not to criticize the other counties, it's just to telling the program works to do what it's supposed to do. And other counties are still going, hear me folks that are out there, that think that this means ICE will not be enforcing in Maryland. No, they will. They will. And counties will participate. because in some fashion it just won't be documented, and it'll be a bit left up a bit to interpretation by somebody in a county sheriff's department or a county police force, and without the protections of 287G, which treats everybody the same when they walk in the jailhouse door. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. All right, Senator from Baltimore County on the favorable report.
Thank you very much. Floor leader would rise.
Senator, may proceed.
Thank you very much. In your comments and in the discussions that I was hearing, our colleague had spoken about mischaracterizations, misinformation, and the like. So there are just a couple things that, if you wouldn't mind, just if we could talk about. I believe one of the statements that was made was that U.S. citizens can't be deported. Yet I'm looking at my feed right now, and it talks about a 5-year-old U.S. citizen that was deported to the Honduras. Her mother may have been undocumented, but she was a U.S. citizen and was deported because of this stuff. So U.S. citizens can be affected and get caught up into these types of programs. Am I correct?
That is absolutely correct. And to add more, I'm aware of veterans, people who have served our nation in uniform, also citizens who've been ensnared in this.
Thank you. Next, when we were talking about the models, and we discussed there being 2 different models, and the purpose of the models, or the model that's used here in Maryland, to kind of force things into the jail. But during testimony, we talked a bit about, and you touched on this just a little bit, but I'd like you to expound a little bit on it, the deportation pipeline. So while our colleague is correct that the sheriffs aren't out there enforcing ICE immigration laws and the like, they are out there, and they have something that you talked about, which is the deportation pipeline. We've talked about how you have the misuse of pretextual traffic stops to force people into the pipeline. Would you mind expounding on that a little?
Thank you, Senator. I mean, I couched it as it depends on whose shoes you walk in, but you've said it more directly, and I appreciate that. Many people are susceptible to the criminal justice system, and when you have these agreements in place, they mandate that level of cooperation, and it's indiscriminate for the offense. So people who are accused, simple accusations, have not gone through the due process, so they're not convicted, they're just accused, it's an allegation, are subject to this process now. And what you have is people that are accused of very pedestrian offenses who are now subject to what we described, I think accurately, as a deportation pipeline, put on a fast track, put through those due process proceedings that we described, that you're seeing in the Baltimore Detention Center, separated from family, separated from community, destroying lives for a very, very, very minor accusation. That's where we are today.
And the majority of the people who are being put into this deportation pipeline, who do they look like? Do they look like you and me?
That's an accurate description, and
thank you very much.
I appreciate that.
I appreciate you.
All right, thank you, Senator. On the favorable report, recognize Senator from Frederick County.
Thank you, Mr. President. If the floor leader would yield for a follow-up question.
Senator, may proceed.
My good friend from Baltimore County made an excellent point about appearances, and I really want to enforce this. I want to drive this point home. The 287G program, when someone is under arrest for another offense, they're brought into the detention facility, they are asked a standardized series of questions, are they not, Senator?
Senator, that's correct.
And those standardized questions and how they're uniformly applied can lead the officer, the corrections officer, not a sworn law enforcement officer, to determine that they may be in the country illegally. Is that a fair assessment?
Correct, yeah, depending on the model that you're talking about.
And the jail model.
The 2 jail models, yeah, that's correct.
So does it matter what sex they are, what race they are when they apply those questions, or do they ask them to everyone regardless of the question?
Senator, they ask them to everyone regardless.
Okay,
that's right.
Perfect. So, and again, I think you touched on this, and I apologize if you did. I was kind of scribing down. You know how I am. I frantically write things down, Senator. You know this about me. How many law enforcement officers are sworn or deputized as ICE agents in the state of Maryland?
Senator, because we have a jail enforcement model, none. They're correctional
None.
officers.
Okay, thank you. And when we're talking about, the comment that was made earlier, again, about the color of skin potentially being a race-based application. The ACLU, the National ACLU, was at our committee hearing last week, were they not?
Yes, that's correct.
And on the 287G program, how many lawsuits does the National ACLU or Maryland ACLU have against any of the jailhouse models, actually any county exercising or enforcing the 287G program? Do you remember what her answer was?
I do not, but I'm
sure
the senator will educate
The answer was
us.
none.
Yeah.
The answer was none. And then I actually expanded it. And I said, how many lawsuits does the ACLU have against the state of Maryland for their enforcement strategies with the 287G program? And her comment was once again, none. She did acknowledge that they sue a lot. Like, they've got a lot of lawsuits, if you remember. And she reinforced that even when I brought up the previous administration, the Biden administration, that they sued the Biden administration just as much as they're doing today. And they also sued last time Trump was in office. And they also sued when Obama was in office. And I made it to the point that, well, the ACLU sues a lot. However, we currently have nothing relative to the 287G program with a lawsuit in the state of Maryland on any of these programs. So I would rebuke the statement earlier that it was basically a race-based motive, because it's not. That's the unique thing about the 287G program, is that it is a uniform application under law. So what counties do not work with ICE at all? Do we know that? Not talking about 287G programs, I'm talking about what counties don't have any interaction with ICE. They refuse to be any federal partnership with ICE.
So Senator, I couldn't give you that answer because if they don't have a 287G agreement, which so there are 8 or 9
Correct.
counties that have a 287G agreement, but then there are at least, I think, 8 policies that I'm aware of.
So there's
You get
8
it to
other
16
counties.
You get to 16, 17, but I don't know what
Okay.
other jurisdictions are cooperating without
Okay.
a formal policy or agreement.
So I appreciate that, and I really do. I want to stay up front that I really do appreciate the chair or the president of the Montgomery County Board being at the meeting last week and her offering up of their policy and her enthusiastic responses as to how they're enforcing this, because it's important to hear how this happens. So I asked for a copy of that policy, which I have right here, and I would say, after reading it, according to even any legal standard, it's opaque at best. I believe that's a fair assessment. So one of the things that I looked at is that it says, in accordance with Montgomery County Executive Order, blah, 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 number, ICE agents are not permitted to enter the non-public space of any county facility. As such, any individual being released, regardless of pending ICE detainer request, will be released. But then there's a big black block right after it. So it's been either redacted or removed. And it's kind of like a cliffhanger. I'm waiting on the rest. And it's not there. So opaque is really pretty generous, because it says, we're not going to work with them, but we do work with them in a policy because we have it right here, but it's not really clearly delineated. Is it fair to say that there's an illegal enforceable standard with the agreement with the 287G program? While we may not agree with it, there is a mechanism. There's training required, there's certifications required, there's a standardized process that goes in place. Is that correct?
Senator, I'd say minimum training, standardization for sure, and universal application for sure.
Fair.
I might say one thing, Senator. Although a process can be uniform in its application, the results, which is the case here, the results do skew in a disparate manner. So, just the back end of it is that you are going to get those disparities.
Yeah.
Although it's front end applied universally.
So I appreciate that, because that actually,
I don't want to be more colorful than that, but
yeah,
you know
I know it's, and actually
no
that's a great
intended.
segue
No
for where I'm headed to
intended on
next.
that. Yeah.
So thank you for that. So, are there circumstances where we talked about? I heard you talk about due process earlier, that we were somehow violating due process through the 287G program. And we talked about Montgomery County's program. I believe it said that they only work with the serious offense, what was it? The serious, I'm drawing a blank on the exact terminology, but the most serious offenses. What are there circumstances through this policy that Montgomery County currently has, or the other counties if they've done a similar policy? And I'm only saying Montgomery County because they have it here, Senator, in fairness. They provided it, and I do appreciate it because it's an important part of this discussion. Are there times when someone is brought into the facility by their own policy, and actually, in fairness, I'm just going to read it to you because it is fair. I don't want you to feel like I'm boxing you in. Under a classification 3 of serious crimes under your own policy, Montgomery County's own policy, not yours, Senator, I apologize. Aliens charged with a serious crime. This relates to the current pending charge only and not prior charges that have been null prossed, dismissed, or for which an individual has been acquitted. In those times, depending serious crimes, their own policy says they can contact ICE. So my question on that is, what is the standardized questions that are asked to determine that the person is in the country illegally? Because it can't be based on their skin, and it can't be based on any other identifying factors. It's got to be asked based on a standardized questioning. But by their own policy, Montgomery County releases them prior to the crime, the case being adjudicated, which means they haven't been given and afforded complete due process. Is that accurate?
First, Senator, I would say that's why I haven't adhered myself to any sort of policy to
Understood.
promote one. And I would say, just for Montgomery County, because they are going under a review process, I would almost like hazard to have too much of a debate on it because it is evolving, subject to public comment and obviously the scrutiny from the council. I would also say that you'd have to look at the intake form as well that accompanies the policy to understand the uniformity of the questions that they ask for everyone that's arrested and brought to the detention center, Senator. But I just don't, I would not want to go farther than that because the policy, Senator, is...
And that's fair, and I appreciate that, and I would like to see that application form because I don't want it to be based on any race or gender or anything like that. I want a uniform, fair application, regardless of your appearance. I think we all want that. So, Senator, my next question is, what in your minds, like, what are the serious, would somebody stealing someone's iPhone, is that a serious criminal offense?
So,
if they didn't do it by force, if they just stole it, it was on the desk.
No,
is
Senator,
that a serious criminal offense?
I would not. I'm not going to opine on the merits of what a serious crime is and what it isn't. I think that's subject to the criminal justice system and to the policymakers at that level that have the policy. But it's a case-by-case basis that you evaluate the facts of the circumstance and make it a decision. But I couldn't give you a bifurcated line.
And that's fair.
Yeah.
What I will say is that the policy that was provided gave theft with a punishment up to 1 year as being a serious criminal offense. And does the body understand that what rises to the level of theft with a 1 year punishment? I'll let you know. If you steal something with a value of more than $100, up to $1,500, and it's your second offense, your punishment is up to $500 and 1 year in jail. Those are serious offenses. $100. If you steal an iPhone, and I'm not an iPhone guy, I know everybody's shocked by this, but I'm a cheap guy on my phone. My phone's, I got a flip. My phone's not overly expensive like some of the iPhones, but the iPhones are almost all over $1,500 now. And $1,500 is Maryland's base floor for a felony offense, for theft. So someone stealing something as simple as an iPhone because they need one or want one, albeit not theirs, they steal it and they're arrested for stealing an iPhone, categorically puts them into a serious crime because the penalty is it is up to 5 years in jail and a $1,500 fine and 5 years in jail. Wow. I mean, you talk about the serious worst of the worst. I just want to point out that in Frederick County's 287G program, which is the longest standing in the state of Maryland, from April 11th of 2008 to December 31st of this past year, there were 6,450 arrestees that were processed through the ICE program. Of those, 2,153 detainers were lodged out of those 6,450, meaning that encountered through the program, about a third were processed and had detainers. Not all of them. Of the others, you had 4,297 database checks completed. And the database is completed when an arrestee is vetted by the corrections officer through the standards questioning, and it is determined that the subject is in the country legally, not subject to removal, meaning they could be a lawful permanent resident or a valid visa holder, or could be a U.S. citizen at this time, having dual citizenship. And there have been 443 prosecutorial releases. A prosecutorial release is for humanitarian reasons, medical reasons, child custodian reasons, and not a priority on charges. So out of all the interactions that we're talking about this terrible program, the longest serving one has done less than a third of those removals, of all those interacted. So the rest of them are being released back into the community because they're not rising to the level of the detainer. Where my concern comes in is when we haven't taken the time as this body, we're forcing this through quickly. We haven't taken the time in this body, Mr. Senator, to establish a policy that could be used as a model, have we?
Senator, I think that the policy choice that we've made is to disentangle ourselves from a fundamentally flawed government agency that has engaged in serious civil rights, human rights abuses. And so until that ceases, I think we've...
Not in Maryland, Senator.
The policy choice. We've got that going on in Baltimore City right now.
Okay. Well, there's none that have been adjudicated as being somehow illegal operations. They have been worked on. They have been by the letter of the law. So,
Senator, I mean, the body responsible for exercising federal oversight, our congressional delegation, has tried several times to enter that facility to engage in its oversight responsibilities, has been denied illegally. And so we are operating in just an alternate universe with an alternate set of facts.
I would dare to say that's the same issue we're having in our energy crisis right now. We're in an alternate universe.
Well, that's a different chairman you have that conversation with.
My point being is we're getting rid of a standardized program that has no lawsuits pending in the state of Maryland. And by removing that, do we not open ourselves up to the potential of seeing what we're seeing in Minnesota with federal agents, boots on the ground, masked? Because now we are no longer vetting them, every person that comes through the jails. Are we not opening ourselves up to that type of operation by our federal partners? Because we haven't talked to them. And by removing the program, are we opening ourselves up to that possibility?
I'm sorry, Senator. So by removing 287G programs, the question is, are we inviting more?
By forcibly removing a constitutionally elected state holder's office, the office of sheriff, mandated, it's constitutionally mandated for each county, by removing their authority to enter into this agreement, are we not now declaring ourselves a sanctuary state where we are not going to work with our federal partners except for individual policies that will vary from county to county, ultimately exposing us to liability because we have not established a policy here in this body to give uniform direction, command and control across to replace where we're taking away a program, again, that has 0 lawsuits in the state of Maryland from the ACLU.
Senator, I think when you have more ICE activity in your state, the prospect of litigation rises significantly. Otherwise, I would say that the jurisdictions that do not have ICE or 287G agreements have not fallen symptom to what the senator is suggesting. So I'd push back on that.
Sure.
Senator.
Thank you. Under the current model, and even with the agencies that do cooperate through a policy, when someone is arrested, albeit may or may not have complete due process, I think we can agree on that there is still that cavity. There's going to be a void there. Everybody talks about due process, due process, due process, because ICE is violating due process, but now counties are going to have policies that are going to violate due process, subjecting themselves to individual lawsuits as well as statewide because of this bill. Currently, under the 287G program, how does it functionally work out, the transition of the arrested subject to be turned over to ICE? Like, is it in the detention center? Is it out on the street? Is it how does it happen?
So the way that it happens is that, depending on which model you're operating under, the warrant service officer model or the jail enforcement model,
sure,
both are permissible under Maryland law. That's going to happen. If that notification is going to ask for a 48-hour hold after that person would have normally been released, and they're going to transition that person inside of the detention center.
So inside the safety and security controlled environment of the detention center. Is that a fair assessment?
That's correct.
We agree? Okay.
Yeah.
By removing this, we may still have that, whether it's in violation of due process or not, and it's going to vary by policy now for all 24 jurisdictions. We're going to see the increase, again, of this street enforcement on our streets, because by taking this position, we have taken a stand that we are not looking for solutions with our federal partners. The last bill we had, we're not looking for solutions and continued protections for our federal agents who are out there doing a very thankless job that they're sworn to do. We're not looking to protect their families. We're looking to those people that are making the loudest noise about things, and there's going to be virtually no difference by removing the 287G policy in the state of Maryland, because every county will be allowed to have their own policy and turn people over to ICE still, and they may now spill out into the street if they don't allow for a peaceful transition. Is that fair?
Senator, I would just reiterate that nothing in this bill or the last bill precludes cooperation with federal law enforcement from our state and locals to solve, to hold people accountable and to solve crime and to go after folks that are suspected of serious crime. So none of that will happen. No impediment will happen with that level of cooperation.
But that's my point.
I could not tell you what the other counties will do, and I think that the level of scrutiny applied to those local agreements, if a county should choose to engage in one, is going to be significant.
So just like the last bill, Senator, where we didn't have any contact through our federal relations team that we have here to find and facilitate a meaningful solution that would have substantive outputs. Like, we put all this stuff in the inputs, right? We want to have substantive outputs. So this bill is going to do the same thing the last bill is. It's another response that's going to end up in the courts, but it's also not changing anything except the process being standardized by having the agreement. And I guess that's where my concern comes in, is that when we have this type of opportunity, we haven't on either SB 1 or this SB 245, did we reach out for either of these to our federal partners to find a solution to make Maryland potentially the beacon, the tip of the spear in how we handle this federal immigration in cooperation with our federal partners? Did we do that at all?
The committee engaged in extensive research and 2 site visits, one to Hartford County and one to Frederick, to understand the inner workings of the 287G program and the implications and the many, many flaws of the program. And so the committee has made a very informed decision after significant consultation with our federal partners and have decided to disentangle ourselves from this fundamentally flawed program.
Senator, I appreciate the answer, but that's not what I asked. What I asked was, did we do anything proactively to engage with our federal partners? Not the local jurisdictions that are doing the program that showed everybody the models. Did we do anything on SB 1? Did we do anything on SB 245 to engage our federal partners to find a reasonable solution with meaningful outputs, tangible, that the communities could feel safe in? Did we do it? Did we take that effort to Washington, D.C. and work with any of our partners down there?
Senator, sorry if it wasn't clear, but when we engaged in those site visits, we had significant conversation with federal partners who are operating within within those 2 jurisdictions. So that's federal level engagement to understand the program and the implications. So
there was one gentleman,
Hartford County and Frederick County.
There was one gentleman that showed up, and he's kind of like the liaison. What I'm talking about is our partners in Washington, D.C., like the congressional body, to find the solution. And this is my point: is we're so divisive in our efforts and how we're trying to find this solution. We're not doing it. Everybody wants to go to their corner. We're not coming to a middle ground. Everybody wants to stand on their own side and cast shade on the other side instead of finding meaningful, tangible solutions. So I appreciate your answers, Senator, and thank you for your time.
All right. On the favorable committee report, further discussion on the report.
Mr. President.
Yes, I recognize the Senator from Baltimore County on the report.
Just a few things, just I want to make certain that we clarify in here. Again, the floor leader, if I may have your attention.
Sir, may proceed.
I had made comments earlier about the impact of some of these programs on people or persons of color. So there's a distinction between the application of the law and the impact of the law. And what we were talking about is, and the data says so, there is a certain impact on people of color when it comes to this law enforcement. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now let's talk a little bit about application. Are you familiar with the Nome versus Vasquez Perdomo case? So if you're not, and I'm looking, because references matter, unlike these fake statistics that are coming out of DHS. On Stanford Law's webpage, it states, on September 8th, 2025, in the case of Nome versus Vasquez Perdomo, the Supreme Court signaled its support for ICE's continued use of racial profiling in immigration policing. By staying a lower court's restraining order, the court allowed agents once again to stop and arrest people based on how they look. Oh my. The language they speak, right? Where they live, and the kind of work they do. The closest the court came to providing reasons for its intervention came in the form of a non-precedential concurrence authored by Justice Kavanaugh in its common sense to do the heavy lifting, just as it has in the court's immigration policing jurisprudence for decades at the expense of facts, evidence, and individual rights. Does that sound like application? Make sure I want to make sure you hear it. Does it sound like application?
It certainly does.
Thank you. Mr. President, context matters. And I've told some of the advocates in talking about this legislation that we have before us, and I've been in this in the General Assembly since 2015, and advocates have been coming for a number of years talking about these issues. And this past year for me, I had my Edmund Pettus Bridge moment. You know, for years, black folk were subjugated to dog attacks and all types of police brutality. But it was not until It was filmed, the police officers hammering on people's heads, sicking dogs on people, that this country finally moved in the right direction. And when we see people who are being shot and killed for exercising their constitutional rights, and not only am I talking about the First Amendment, but we saw what happened to someone just because he decided to wear and carry a gun to a protest, Second Amendment. Just because we see these things happening, we have to rise to the moment. We cannot ignore and act like we're living in normal days and times. This is not how law enforcement should be acting. And that's why when we finally get to that moment we're able to pass this bill, I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Senator. All right, on the report, if there's no further discussion on the report, we'll adopt the favorable committee report. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Recognize the minority whip on the has an amendment.
Yes, Mr. President, I do have an amendment.
All right, Senator, pages, please collect and distribute the senator's amendment. All right, Senator, may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I saw an opportunity here to improve this legislation. You know, I'm always looking to do that, Mr. President. One of the big loopholes we have as it relates to, we've had a problem in the country on illegal immigration where anytime folks like myself have mentioned online or just in speaking that we need to secure our borders, we do need to have people who are here legally go back, and do the process the right way. Particularly, and we particularly need to have people leave the country that have engaged in other criminal activity. There's a lot of folks who will throw back at me, well, you know, why don't you go after the businesses and employ people that are here illegally? And I agree, that's wrong. The federal government has a fantastic E-Verify system that allows you to check and be sure someone's here legally before you employ them. So this amendment would simply add to this bill that we mandate E-Verify in the state of Maryland. I think that would help with making sure we don't have people attracted here that are here legally to come work, and it would also make sure that our business, all of our job creators know they need to employ, and most of them follow the law already, but that they need to employ either American citizens or people who are legally present with an ability to work here with a green card. So I would press my amendment, Mr. President, and I ask the body's support.
All right, Senator has moved the amendment. Let's hear from the floor leader on the amendment.
This is actually, thank you very much, Senator. This is a significant policy decision, not subject to any level of scrutiny from our committee, and may not have even been in our committee of jurisdiction. I would just significant policy departure here, and I would ask the body to respectfully just reject the amendment.
Thank you, Senator. All right, on the amendment, any further discussion? Recognize the maker of the amendment.
Just in closing, Mr. President, this is the pro-labor amendment. My friends in organized labor would agree with me that illegal immigration, much as the great Cesar Chavez once said, illegal immigration breaks down the spirit of those who are working legally, and it also it pits people against each other for with lower wages. So, Mr. President, I think it would be really smart for us to adopt this amendment. I ask for a roll call.
All right, on the amendment, if there's no further discussion, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 31 votes in the negative, the senator's amendment fails. Are there further amendments to the bill or its title? Just recognize the minority leader has an amendment.
Yes, Mr.
Senator Pages, please collect and distribute the senator's amendment. Goes just a moment. Senator may proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. This is a fairly simple amendment. We've had a lot of conversations about what's going on currently within the counties and how they're handling immigration enforcement. What this simply does is it does not restrict a county from entering into an immigration enforcement agreement. And it also does not require a county to terminate an agreement that might be in place already. So again, I think this is important because we've seen that counties have already found a way to handle this issue. We've heard the floor leader talk about, you know, a policy that was, or a process that was familiar to him. I would assume that as Montgomery County, I'm not positive, but I would assume based on listening to the bill hearings and the voting session that Montgomery County does have a process in place that it's using. At the same time, we heard from the county executive in Wicomico County that also has an agreement in place, and obviously that agreement that she has decided on is to adopt the 287G policy. So I think what's important is that the counties should be able to decide. They are the ones that are in charge of our public safety. And they've made those decisions. They are elected bodies, whether it's the county executive and the county council, or whether it's a set of county commissioners. They are the ones that are elected, and they're the ones that are charged with protecting the safety of our communities. Mr. President, also to back this up, you know, again, I go back to the committee hearing and where the support comes from on this bill. And once again, you know, 95% of the groups that I see to support this, I've not heard of. But again, the one group that opposes this bill goes back again, the Maryland Chiefs of Police Association and the Maryland Sheriff's Association. Again, these are the appointed and elected officials in our counties that are charged with public safety. They have opposed both of these bills. I mean, if there's anyone that we should be listening to when it comes to protecting our communities and the welfare of its citizens, it's those that are charged to do that. But we've gone a completely different direction, and we're listening to the, you know, specific advocacy groups and what they feel and what they're watching on TV. These are the people charged with protecting our community. They're the people that have said that these bills, both of these bills, are not appropriate. So again, I'm going to press the amendment to say, let the counties decide. They have lived this issue a lot longer than anybody in this room. They have lived the charge, they are in charge of protecting our communities. And at the end of the day, I think that they should be held responsible as elected officials to protect their communities. And with that, Mr. President, I would move the amendment.
All right, Senator has moved the amendment. Let's hear from the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And not to relitigate how I think these agreements make our communities actually less safe, this amendment fundamentally undermines the bill. And so for those reasons, if you believe in the sum and substance of this bill, you will not accept this amendment.
All right, on the amendment, recognize Senator from the Lower Eastern Shore.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of the amendment. When you look at the individual counties, when you defer and look at the sheriffs and the law enforcement that have the working relationships, when they come forward and wanting to do agreements because they believe that that's safer in our communities, that these that questioning those who are detained in the correctional facilities and not out in the community to avoid situations like we're seeing in Minneapolis. I want to defer. I think we should defer to our locals, law enforcement, who want to enter into those agreements and are committed to making sure that they will work to keep our community safe. It was referenced in Wicomico County about moving forward with an agreement. Again, it would be a jail-based model, again, for reasons for public safety to avoid situations like we're seeing in Minneapolis. So for these reasons, I'm supporting the amendment.
Thank you, Senator. All right, on the amendment, any further discussion? Senators request a roll call vote. If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 32 votes in the negative, the senator's amendment fails. Are there further amendments to the bill or its title? Yes, recognize the senator from Baltimore County. Senator has an amendment. Pages will collect and distribute the senator's amendment.
Thank you very much.
All right, Senator may explain the amendment.
Thank you very much. Just to provide some context, on February 27th of 2025, the House Judiciary held at its hearing on the Maryland Values Act to ban 287G agreements. On the exact same day, Garrett County signed the paperwork to enter into a 287 MOU with ICE, which became effective the very next day. 4 days later, both Carroll County and St. Mary's County signed MOUs. 2 days after that, Washington County signed an MOU, and 2 months thereafter, Allegheny signed theirs. Prior to them, there were 4 counties that had memorandums of agreement with ICE. Now, why does that matter? What this amendment does is it makes it an emergency bill so that as soon as this crosses the governor's desk and the governor signs it, this ban would essentially be in effect. Now, why does that matter? When looking at, and I made it certain that I looked at each of these agreements, the 4 agreements that were signed prior to 2025 all allow the counties to terminate agreement at will whenever they want to. The last 4 that were entered into this past year in 2025, they all had 90-day termination periods unless exigent circumstances involving public safety dictated otherwise. So, I don't know what any others, I mean, when you're looking at everything that's happening in public safety and around, I certainly would agree that that the counties have a public safety exception in order to terminate this agreement. Just looking at this article that was just published in the Associated Press, and it reads, federal immigration officers are asserting sweeping power to forcibly enter into people's homes without a judge's warrant, according to an internal immigration and customs enforcement memo obtained by the Associated Press, marking a sharp reversal of longstanding guidance meant to respect constitutional limits on governmental searches. What does that mean? They're violating the 4th Amendment. You can't talk about anything else that would be any more foundational to our constitutional laws and public safety. Therefore, I move the amendment.
All right, Senator has moved the amendment. Let's hear from the floor leader.
Thank you very much, and thank the maker of the amendment. The committee views this as a friendly amendment.
All right, on the amendment, recognize the minority leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would request a roll call vote on this. But
thank you, Senator.
In opposition of this amendment, this again goes exactly against what we've seen with the counties being able to dictate their own public policy with respect to public safety. Mr. President, your beginning statements on opening day, you talked about federalism, right? The separation or the shared responsibility of governing. And yes, you talked about it with respect to federal and state government and handing down some of those responsibilities and that autonomy. But here we're doing the exact opposite when it comes to our own counties in the state of Maryland. Rather than allowing them to make the best choices on how to handle public safety in their communities, we are dictating what they must or cannot do in this case. That's not the way we should be handling public safety. We should be allowing those that are elected to make the best decisions for their communities. And this bill not only says, takes what we have been arguing it before, but accelerates it and says you must come out of these agreements immediately. Again, that's going to cause a lot of concern with how these immigration detainees are handled, how this enforcement is going to take place. You're giving the counties that are in these agreements absolutely no time to figure out how they're going to handle this. And again, Mr. President, I would agree with you on some issues of federalism. I would agree that in this case, we should allow the counties to have some autonomy and decide how they want to handle their public and public safety issues. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator from the 1st District.
Thank you, Mr. President. In reaction to the comments made from my good friend from Senator Baltimore County, I actually take exception. I represent 3 of those counties in which he had made some assumptions. I do not believe there was any data, and while we're not to impugn the motive of any member of this body, I tend to believe that that's extended to other elected officials as well. And I just want the record to be straight, that I think that that was maybe an unintentional, and I hope there was no intentions of speaking ill of the three sheriffs that I represent in Washington County, Garrett, Allegheny, and Washington, Allegheny, and Garrett. Thank you. Really put back by it. I really am. Look, I understand we can discuss policy. I understand that we can put actual facts on the table, but I felt that that was being impugned. Second of all, as this being emergency legislation, I think that it's going to fast track it to find that this is unconstitutional and close this door for whatever we're trying to accomplish here. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator, and thanks for that observation. Hopefully we can have a conversation afterwards, too. All right, any further discussion on the amendment? Senator's requested a roll call. Oh, yes, recognize the Senator from Baltimore County.
Parliamentary question, point of order.
Senator may proceed.
Can someone ask for a roll call vote rather than the person who made the
Yes,
amendment?
it's a voluntary by any member of the body.
Thank you.
All right, further discussion? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote? Chair, in explaining his vote on why this particular amendment I think is so worthy and important, I mentioned this to some of the Democratic senators. I had a conversation with my colleague who represents in Minnesota, the President Pro Tem, Bobby Joe Champion, who is a phenomenal public servant and represents Minneapolis, and reached out to him after everything that had happened over this weekend, just horrified, expressing our sympathies here in Maryland. And we had a conversation just about how challenging it has been, and especially after the weekend. And the thing that he said to me just keeps ringing over and over and over again, that in 2026, in the first few weeks of 2026, Minneapolis has had 3 homicides. 2 of the 3 homicides are at the hands of law enforcement agents that worked for ICE. And I can't get over this fact that that is the sentiment that Minnesota is experiencing. And so when we think about the values, particularly in this body where our first ever president resigned his commission and said civilians are in charge of law enforcement and the Army, our values of who we are inscribed on what we as civilians say law enforcement should be. And God forbid what we've seen in Minnesota continue. I know there's lots of disagreement on this. I deeply appreciate the debate here and the thoughtful consideration. But we are in a really important moment, and so I appreciate this truly being an emergency that we figure out how to move forward and figure out who we are. So with that,
Mr. President.
Yes.
Explain my vote.
Senator has 2 minutes to explain his vote.
Okay. So, Mr. President, I appreciate the good words and but actions have consequences. And when people, they have the right to lawfully assemble. What they don't have the right is to insert themselves into a lawful matter that has been handed out and carried out by several administrations, regardless of party. This is we cannot continue to allow or enable a mindset that people think they can insert themselves into an official law enforcement act without consequences of arrest. And those unfortunate consequences at times get escalated. Again, it goes back to the Graham v. Connor and the actions of an officer. In hindsight, we can sit here and look through it at a 20/20 lens all day long. But nobody in here, or very few, have ever sat there and been in a fight for their life with a gun on their hip and had to take serious actions to defend their life and the life of others. The point being is when you want to legally protest, that is their right. That is the constitutionally protected right. The moment you insert yourself into a lawful law enforcement function, you have gone beyond that right to peaceably assemble and now have created a criminal act. And that's the part that's not being reminded about lawful, peaceful demonstrations in response to this, not encouraging members of our community to insert themselves into law enforcement actions, whether they agree with it or not. We cannot continue to enable a mindset that our officers are bad when they're out enforcing laws, whether we agree with them or not, because you're putting, not you, we are putting members that are protectors of our community's lives at risk, as well as their families. And with that, I will gladly vote against this amendment and the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. All right, any further senators wish to explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 33 votes in the affirmative, the senator's amendment is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 245 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Senators, the desk is clear. Again, thank you all. Thank you for this is important issues. Thank you for the thoughtful debate and discussion. It's important. This is what democracy looks like. So, all right, if we could hear from committees. Chair of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. President. Finance will meet at 2 o'clock. We have a briefing on Carillon issue and a briefing on certified community behavioral health, and then we have 10 bills to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Chair of Education, Energy, and the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tripoli has a busy afternoon. We are going to meet at 2 p.m. for a briefing on PFAS regulation, followed by a briefing introducing the new chair of the Public Service Commission and the new director of the Maryland Energy Administration. Then we have 4 bill hearings, and then followed by our first voting session of the session. So we're going to start at 2 p.m. in the Tripoli hearing room.
Excellent. Thank you, Senator. Chair of Budget and Tax.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our Health Subcommittee has been invited to join Finance for that behavioral health component. And then tomorrow at 11:30, both our Health Subcommittee and our Public Safety Subcommittee will be meeting.
Excellent. Thank you, Senator. Chair of Judicial Proceedings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The Judicial Proceedings Committee will meet at 2 o'clock for a briefing on autonomous vehicles. Special shout out to the senator from District 16 who's played an instrumental role in organizing today's briefing.
Excellent. Wonderful. Thank you. All right. Other standing committees, executive nominations? We'll be in pro forma tomorrow. And just actually, as we'll have pro forma tomorrow, assuming there's no storm this weekend, but we'll be in on Monday, but this bill will probably come up for third reading on Tuesday. So we'll probably leave it as unfinished business on Monday for the evening. Both, yes. So Monday evening, we will not be back until Monday evening. So executive nominations.
Thanks, Mr. President. Yeah, our first meeting for executive noms will be on February 9th, and all members will be getting an agenda. Listen to people in your constituents who will be up for meeting the committee.
Perfect.
Thank you.
So not this Monday. Thank you very much. That's helpful. All right. Any further standing committees, select committees, delegations? Eastern Shore, Lower Eastern Shore, Senator from the 38th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to ask the body to welcome Dr. Kelly Kennan, a friendly and popular dentist from Salisbury, and her beautiful daughter, Jillian. They came all the way up from Salisbury to not only hear the debate today, but also are here for a House hearing on an important child protection bill. So I just appreciate the extra effort you made to come up, and if we could just greet them. Thank you.
Of course, welcome. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. Senator from Baltimore City.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Baltimore City Senate delegation will meet tomorrow at 8:45 to get a briefing/hearing on Baltimore City bonding initiatives. Thank you.
All right, 8:45. Thank you, Senator. Baltimore County.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Monday at 3 o'clock, the Baltimore County delegation will host our county executive and some of the economic development folks, so 3 o'clock. And then I would like to invite everybody to join us for our district night. First ever in the almost 12 years since I've been here that we're having a District 11 night over in the House, room 108.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Lots of doctors. Lots of doctors. Yeah.
That's true.
Yes, recognized Senator from Prince George's.
Thank you, Mr. President. Since my seatmate announced their district night, District 47 night is going to be Monday in Miller. Definitely invite you all to come out. We're going to have some entertainment from one of our local high schools that I'm really excited about.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you, Senator. Yes, Senator from Montgomery County.
Yeah, just to correct the record, MedChi has advised me that District 15 is home to more doctors than District 11. I just want to clarify.
Thank you for correcting the record, Senator. That's all right. Any further discussion? Announcements? Caucuses? It appears not. All right. Let's do a quorum call before we adjourn.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their presence? If so, the clerk will take the call. With 45 members in the chamber and a quorum being present, the Senate of Maryland remains in session. Recognizing the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate of Maryland stand adjourned until Friday, January 30th, for a pro forma session at 11 a.m.
11 a.m. Without objection, so ordered. Have a successful day today, everyone.